doing some caregiving, so I'll get my mask on. My parents. Let's go ahead and get started. We have everyone in attendance, and we have Mr. Bradley as Mr. Mellon's proxy today. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Cool. Thanks, Kira. Just real quick framing. We've talked in the past, and just want to re-ground us in the same set of slides that we've gone through multiple times around what the purpose of school accountability is. Hopefully, if there's disagreement, folks will voice that and get us in a good place for our final report that's going to be talked about in a minute by Kira. So the purpose is to improve academic achievement, and because our goal is to improve academic achievement, it needs to motivate adults in the building to focus on student academic growth and measurable outcomes. Adults are focused on those things, but we should, one, reward it, and two, it should be motivating. We want it to provide a fair assessment of performance for the purposes of communicating, making it easy for parents and educators to understand, communicating the right things, and it should lastly allow us to prioritize resources, energy, and interventions on schools in need of improvement. So it needs to be able to differentiate schools. There need to be A, B, C, D, and F schools if there are A, B, C, D, and F schools in our state. The next slide is what we were trying to accomplish when we started this. We wanted to strengthen our system's growth component so that real growth is incentivized and rewarded. We want to maintain our proficiency standards or goals. We want to make sure that high school accountability reflects college and career readiness standards and aligns with 3 through 8 as much as possible. Ensure results are clear and easy to understand, that our expectations are consistent across K-12, and we want to minimize double counting as that magnifies weight and adds complexity. Today we're going to talk about...
Yep. What about, and this may be in there somewhere, I don't know, but I want to make sure we cover it. And that is addressing the concept of parallel pathways for high school students. So that regardless of which track you choose, if you choose the Jump Start track or the Office Education track, that during the course of your high school career, no matter where you're at, regardless of which track you're on, if you progress as far as you can in that track, as a student, you should get as much academic credit as your peer that's on the other track, and your school should get just as much credit for you and your peer who progress just as far on parallel pathways. So that way we know that ultimately there's no situation where the accountability system incentivizes people in the building to put students on one track or the other. It's really about where's the student's passion, and the student's passion is going to put them on one track or the other, and then the system rewards them for how deep they go along that pathway.
Ryan, are you making a suggestion, an additional bullet to this slide that is not captured here?
Well, kind of what I'm asking you guys, if it's not captured here,
Yeah.
I'd like to add it.
Yeah.
If it is captured here, it's not jumping out at me, so
Right.
help me find it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's
If you guys agree on the concept.
Yeah.
I think what I would offer is this might be a place where it's complex and something that we probably need to do a lot of engagement with stakeholders on how they would fit it into. If we think that the framing is right in the proposals we put out, I think that's the place where you go to educators and say, help us understand for a student who is on a Jump Start pathway, what are the steps along the way and how might we figure out how to award partial credit or partial completion. I don't know if we're going to be able to sort that out together as a group, but we can put that out there in our engagement process.
So I'm not necessarily looking for the answers right now. I just want to put it on there as a priority. It says, hey, we think this is something that should be part of our system. You know, we've talked before about the stigma associated with the Jump Start pathway. How do you address that stigma? To me, you start out by making sure that I've got appropriate incentive, right? And I'm not biased one way or the other.
Yeah, the thought that when you started talking, I thought you were saying something, and then you kept talking, I thought you were saying something else, but I'm back to what I thought you were saying at the beginning, which Dr. Brumley actually has said multiple times to me, is this idea of like no closed doors, right? Like he doesn't want anything in the formula to say like the door is closed for this kid, they need to be on this path and they need to be like stuck there. So I think that's a good point that we need to grapple with a little bit. And we can pressure test ideas here around what we could do to satisfy that,
Okay.
unless others. So today we're going to talk about potential approach from now until August, including some stakeholder engagement and timeline. We're going to do more conversation about the K-12 simulations that we've seen, talk about student growth, high school and K-2 accountability, and then we'll get to next steps. Hand it over to Ms. Orange Jones.
Okay. So a potential approach to June and August, right? The question is, how are we going to land the plane? The first is a reminder that our next meeting, our next meeting is in 2 weeks, right? We've already done the date. And it's a discussion of a report that will ultimately be submitted to the rest of the BESE board at our June meeting. So the deliverable that we are actually charged with is informing that report that will go to BESE in June, right? What will be included in that? Problem statements, issues explored, value statements, that's where our work began. Proposals to address the key concerns, which we've laid out, which what our charge was. Formal stakeholder feedback, which will happen during June and July, including a set of areas to seek feedback from stakeholders on ahead of the August meeting. So in a moment, Thomas will speak more to what that will look like, but essentially there's a body of stakeholder engagement work, which I know has been a priority of this work group from the beginning, that will happen between June and August, with the expectation that August is when the department will be ready to bring forward a set of policy recommendations to the board. Right. I think I've already kind of shared everything. The areas for stakeholder engagement are also listed here, so sort of feel free to speak to those, but I kind of gave a high level so I won't be redundant. And that basically means that in August, the draft of the bulletin revisions will be available and considered, and that will obviously be a public meeting and open to the public to get feedback on that stage. But hopefully by August, we will actually have an approved set of recommendations to move forward. Questions about the approach to June and August?
So we're going to have, for the August deliverable, we're going to have, sounds like, some specific recommendations relative to bulletin revision.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And a set of
Which is really beyond, specific. I'm sorry, which is really beyond recommendations for consideration.
Correct. Because as a reminder to our group and the public, this is not a decision-making body, but rather a work group, a study group. The culmination of our work will be in the form of a report that will have some of those considerations, the big ideas that we've grappled with, some direction for the board, and then we will discuss it as a full board, what those particular areas are. And coming out of that, there has to be enough direction to the department so that the department then can focus on stakeholder engagement and really honing in on a set of bulletins and policy recommendations to bring to us in August.
So when we think about this then, so what you're saying is in June with the report, are we going to be anticipating that BESE makes a motion that tells the department to pursue, say, changes to the way growth is calculated and to bring those? Okay,
That would be on the table to put in the report, yes. And then BESE would have to discuss that as a full board and decide whether or not that's actually something that might be recommended.
So, but why are we doing that before we really get stakeholder input into it? Like, isn't that kind of putting the cart before the horse? Or am I not understanding the timeline correctly?
I think that there's almost like a chicken or egg question, right? And right now, we've had like a lot of rich discussion. We've thrown out a lot of ideas. We've talked a lot about things that we like and don't like. And now we kind of have to put out, this is the direction the board is thinking to go in, and let people push back on that instead of pushing back on like 1,400 ideas.
Okay.
But we are clear, these, if I'm following it right, I'm following Dr. Davis, proposals to address the concerns, then in reality, these are proposals without stakeholder, or without total stakeholder input, is that fair?
Without complete stakeholder
yeah.
input, yes.
We just want to be totally transparent
Yes,
about that, right?
Yes, I mean, I don't see another way to move without beginning to engage the board directly on a set of early proposals that this group has grappled with, but still realistically recognizing that those ideas are subject to evolve as we get to stakeholder
Right.
engagement.
So basically, to Mr. Lambert's comment, we're providing the public with an opportunity to process an update
That's right.
from this work group. So this is the starting point for public comment.
Correct. And as many of the public who's even here today or certainly have been listening, these conversations have been continuous. So it's not like new ideas would be present in the report, but rather would be the culmination of the several discussions this work group has grappled with. And so some people in the public are likely engaged already, and yet we know we have a lot more engagement to do. Mr. Carson?
Yeah, I'd like to highlight the thought that I've been getting public comment and feedback
Along the
throughout
way.
this whole process, and I would imagine you all have too. So
Absolutely.
that, I think, should be mentioned.
Absolutely. I think that's been true for all of us.
For sure. And we've got an Excel spreadsheet that we developed, right? That captures topics that have been brought forward and that have been discussed and that have been closed out and the ones that are still open, right?
Correct.
Okay. So we've got documentation for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the meetings are recorded and got slides and all that.
And we'll have an opportunity to engage on the content of the report in our next meeting. All right, so substantively, even if it's an outline at that point, so that we can then direct the department to continue to complete that report that I would then share to the board.
And so after the June meeting, when we're doing the stakeholder engagement, what will be the process for this group and the department if stakeholder engagement leads us to say, okay, this needs to be tweaked or concerned? Will we have a meeting of this group so that we can talk about whether or not, what was brought to us is legit?
The last bullet, at the end of that bullet, it says potentially additional work group meetings. Yep.
Amendments, things you'd like to see different? Otherwise, I'd like to read through them.
Yeah, I just want to say, so far, just want to comment, so far that I think we've had some really good discussion on the growth concept. And I think we've learned a lot. But I do have some concern about how broad the discussion has been so far. Particularly the three initial initiatives that were brought to the board in June, and the board, majority of the board voted to defer consideration of those three items until we had a better understanding of what the accountability outcomes would look like. And I don't feel comfortable personally that we addressed those three significantly enough to go back to the board with a recommendation for those three items. K-2 accountability, I don't feel real comfortable with that one either personally, as far as what we covered to date. So that's a concern I have. And then we talked about stakeholder inputs. I think we have a handle on that one.
So I'm curious, Ron, so the purpose of this work group wasn't to start from what those recommendations were and edit from there. It was to start from, look at the entire system
Right.
and then give the department some direction on what that would lead them to want to recommend to the board.
Right.
Are you saying that you would prefer, in terms of process, to go back and look at those initial department recommendations? Or are you saying that you don't believe we've addressed those particular recommendations in the context of the broader analysis that we've done?
The latter.
Okay.
So if I'm on the board and I'm not part of this work group, that's
Then the
gonna
last thing you know is what
Yeah.
we did with that last meeting.
Let's get to the end of today and temperature check you at the end and see if you feel better.
be. Okay,
And if you don't, then we know we gotta do something at the next
Yeah.
meeting.
sounds good.
I think we should, perfect.
Student growth. So we had an expert come in and talk to us about growth at the last meeting. I think that folks learned things, had great rich engagement on it, and wanted to bring back the list of concerns that we wanted to solve in looking at growth. And then in italics, put things underneath it that we've discussed, things that have come to light, things that we've magnified in on. One, awarding points for non-growth, including students who declined. One thing that I think that the experts said to us pretty clearly was that we don't have a vertical scale like some other states, particularly the growth measures that have been pointed out like Florida and Mississippi. We don't have a vertical scale that compares last year to this year with the degree of precision that another model might. In some cases, in that line of thinking, negative scale score change could be an artifact of the test design and the scale that we use. Because our scale is designed to be 750 for mastery, and those decisions were made, and we kind of built our raw and scale transition points to match that. We also know where it is most prominent in our growth model that negative scale score change is happening, that area below that 40th percentile. The next thing that we wanted to solve was step 1 does not value all growth equally, and achievement is mixed into the growth index. One of the things that I think that we've talked about is that step 1 focuses on where students are and how far they need to move, and obviously a student who is farther away will have farther to move. And the question is, should that goal, right, be something that everyone can achieve, or should it signal something? And one of the things that popped in my head as Chris was talking at the last meeting, the expert Chris was talking at the last meeting, is that the two things have to sit in tension with each other. This question of, does the scale allow you to do the this minus this equals this and give you a result, or doesn't it? What step 1 does, which less than a third of students actually complete, is it gives a signal to school systems that this student has a far distance to go to get to mastery. And the farther they are away from that goal, right, the more distance they have to travel. So it creates, like it points out how far that kid has to move this year. And it also acknowledges that in certain areas of the test, that movement might not actually happen in 1 year. It might happen in fits and starts. And that's sort of why the student percentile ranking and the VAM was selected as step 2. The question is, are we doing that rigorously enough in that step 2? And then the last thing that we talked about around growth solving is no matter how much growth a student that is below basic has, the school will still earn an F in the calculation until they reach basic. And one of the ways that we've identified to solve this is increase the rigor of our growth model and increase the weight as one path to resolving concern. And now I'm going to stop and pause for discussion. Reactions, disagreement, inaccuracies.
I'm okay.
So bringing this slide back that we've all seen that highlights where the negative scale score change is happening, which in some cases we know reflects that students didn't actually grow, and in some cases could be the fact that we're not on a vertical scale. There's a pretty clear mark here where it's the vast majority of students, and we're also awarding points in this area. So one thing that we could explore is eliminating the number of points here to 0, which would take away this potential false positive in some cases, and decrease the number of points here to try to bring us into a closer alignment and see if we can come up with a model that helps us to differentiate A, B, C, D, and F schools according to growth, which was a goal, and minimize the places where we are seeing negative scale score change. Minimize the rewarding of points there for false positives, because there are areas where 81% of the points awarded are related to that. And increase the rigor in a real way of modeling.
I thought where we landed on this one was, we were looking at putting, maybe I had the wrong interpretation, but I thought where we landed on this one, we were more leaning towards putting more weight the further you were away on the scale, and gradually decreasing the rate as you get towards mastery.
Are you talking about the initial simulation that we did?
Right.
One of the,
But we put a weight of 2 on the far end.
you're talking about like having 2 growth indicators, one for students who are farther behind, or are you talking about?
I don't remember talking about this.
Well, so this was part of the conversation around negative scale score change.
Right.
This is how we currently award the points.
Right.
The feedback from the subject matter expert was that we should work on bolstering the information that we have in the area below proficiency.
Right.
And work to identify ways to improve our current model while we also improve our test.
Right.
That was their feedback.
Right.
Which would kind of push us away from the simulation that we put out 2 meetings ago.
Right.
And push us more toward looking at what we have and significantly improving that based on what we know about it.
Okay, I thought we were going a different direction. I thought we were looking at true incremental growth, regardless of where you start. So that if I have an expectation that an educator is going to grow a child 1 year academically, in 1 year, that's the most I can reasonably ask from an educator, right? And they're doing their job, doing a great job, they can do it in 1 year, right? So you're looking at raw growth regardless of where they start. And then they take the lead test at the end of the year, that tells me where I am relative to the grade they're supposed to be at. But to me, that tells me my snapshot for expectation. And then if I've got a raw metric for actual growth, regardless of where I start, then I've differentiated the two metrics, right? And I don't have the BAM concept.
So that's part of, and that's why we brought this back. The part of the challenge, right, in saying, did the student improve, right? Without a vertical scale, you can't actually look at 725 or 723 and 723.
What about the new test is going to do that?
It will more accurately help us to get to a place where we understand where in the approaching basic category does the kid fall.
Right.
It is not still going to be on a vertical scale. That would require significant work, and the future of assessment working group that is currently going on that involves a broad group of stakeholders, educators, other leaders. They're thinking about these things as we prepare to do an RFP in the future for what the new test would look like if the test did need to do something different. And that would come to the board. Chris Domoletsky, who is the expert who came and talked, the Center for Assessment is leading that work for us. He is keenly aware of it. Him and Leslie Kane are aware of what we're trying to accomplish, and they are working toward that new goal. But it will take time to get us to a place where we can put it. What he said he could do in 2 years was increase the level of information we have below proficiency, but that would not put us on a vertical scale, which is part of the challenge.
What's missing?
Not a psychometrician. I will ask him to send you that.
So that was my expectation, is that that's going to provide us with enough resolution where we can do it.
No, that's why his recommendation at the end was not to improve our growth model drastically in terms of going from this to this. His recommendation was
Fix the parts that are broken.
fix the parts that are broken, because what we're using is something that other states use, they use well, it works, and it could just be the way that we are using the tool, not the tool itself.
So we're proposing to stay with the BAM concept?
That's the discussion right now.
That's the discussion on it.
So basically, I'm comparing one student to the student across the aisle
You're comparing, so
in the same room,
well, not the same room.
okay, in the same,
Student who looks like
right,
me.
right,
That's who.
right. Right. So that's my concern, is where you set the bar, right? If I'm 48th in the country and I'm gonna set the bar relative to somebody else's 48th in the country, I think the bar's in the wrong place.
Part of that conversation is here, right? And the other thing is that there are different improvement patterns in different areas of the test in terms of the student achievement levels. And by doing student percentile, growth percentile ranking, or VAM, the first step is not to look at the student's characteristics. The first step is to look at the student's previous test results, which gives you an idea of students that last year were at 715, what was their expected score for the next year, which kind of takes out it helps you to almost put things closer, it puts things closer to a vertical scale. It starts to take out some of that noise of how much movement is there, how many scales, how many raw points are there between this kid scored this year and this kid scored this year, which could vary based off test form, which could vary based off of 3rd and 4th grade test content.
But aren't I still being compared to the other students in my population group?
Yes. But that's why you look at the percentiles and you say, what is exemplary comparative growth? What is comparative growth that we're going to give some number of points for? At the moment, we are giving points for students who are performing better than 20% of their peers.
Okay.
So this is the place to where that bar gets set, if that makes sense.
It's still relative to my peers.
Your question was, where do you set the bar?
Yeah. And I don't think it should be set relative to your peers. I think it should be relative to how much you grow in a given year. What if my peers don't grow at all?
The fact that it's not on a vertical scale makes it very hard to be able to answer that question. Our assessment is built around the majority of the information that we have on students is in the mastery and advanced category. That was a test design that was put in place in 2015 when the test was selected and the type of test was created.
But basically you're saying, I'm going to compare a student in this group, which is the lowest 2/3 in the student population. I'm going to compare against the poorest performers in the group. Who runs a business like that?
We can't do what you want us to do, right? I mean, that's I get the point that you're making and what you're trying to do, but if we can't distinguish how much students are actually moving with any degree of accuracy if they're below basic, then that keeps us from doing what you want us to do, which is measuring the growth and then tracking it across years because they're not vertically aligned. Is that right?
Yeah, the thing that I would change is the without any degree of accuracy. Because
It's a blunt.
it's a more coarse measure, and the scale score point change is harder to like say that 1 point is 1 point is 1 point.
Because you're going from one grade level to the next.
And the scores don't mean the same thing, right? Like if I'll give a good example.
Well, the scales aren't the same, right? From grade to
I'll
grade.
give a good example. The scales are the same essentially from grade to grade. They are. There are a few exceptions to that rule, but it's almost always in the mastery and advanced cut point. Well, it's actually always in the mastery and advanced cut point. So, 650 to 725, 750 to 750, like each of those cut points is the same in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. I think that the first time you see a change from that is in master to advanced, I think it's
I'll bring my
6th
cheat
grade.
sheet next time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where was I going
Go
with
give
this?
an example.
Of,
To illustrate why.
yeah, oh, yeah.
We're
perfect.
comparing a particular student in this group to the lowest performing students in the state is a good thing. We understand that.
I think the place where I would back up to is your initial argument about like, they should get credit for growing at 1 grade level.
Okay, that's a bad thing?
No, it's not, but I'm gonna complicate it for you.
Okay.
If that's the case, then if you believe the scales are the same, right, that if you think that the two things are aligned, the scale score points are the same, then a kid that was at 675 last year, being at 675 this year, means they grew 1 year's worth of information. They just didn't grow more than 1 year's worth of information, right? Because they were at, if the scales are the same,
But
then
my understanding was the scales weren't the same. Then that's why we need the additional resolution, is to close the gap between the 2 grade levels. Because somebody could come in 2 grade levels behind, right? They grow 1 grade level, they're still 2 grade levels behind, right? But the scale for that grade level is not going to pick that up.
I think that I need to get you some time with the psychometrician and you'll spend some time on this.
And if you think it's a useful discussion, we're glad to, I can bring it back to the next meeting and we can have that conversation as well.
Okay.
But I don't, just to remind us, and then Mr. Garbage will be next, like, our goal here is not to get perfect consensus. answers, right? We're presenting a report and not making any decisions, and so if you at the end of this still don't believe we should have band, then that's still your opinion, we're still gonna vote at the board level anyway, but this, I wanna make sure that any questions that we have as a work report addressed. Yes, Mr. Garza.
I think this is going to produce the same answer. Let me approach it from a different direction, the question from a different direction. You circled the bottom two lines on this chart and said maybe we should do away with those. The third line, does that represent some students that are not making growth, or can you even tell me that?
Yeah, so, well.
And the follow-up question is, if there are some students that aren't making growth in that line, then why wouldn't we get rid of that line also?
Because the reality is that it's hard to say whether the kid that scale score went backward actually didn't improve in terms of their understanding and knowledge. So like we can start there. But in every one of these categories, students that are performing better than 80% of their peers, 14% of them saw a negative scale score change. So in every one of these categories,
right,
in every one of these categories, some people are seeing that. So the reason why I drew the line here is, here 81% of them, right, are seeing it. This might be a place where we could just say, eliminate that cut point. And then the question becomes, how much do we want to differentiate between 40th and 59th percentile? 40th to 59th percentile it's large, but it's also like squarely in the middle. So then the question becomes, okay, so we're gonna like further cut this, dissect it maybe, and we'll do 45th to 59th, for example, and say, does this get this number closer to half or less than half? And then you start to get to a place where it's like the majority of the kids in this category are seeing what we've eliminated as many false positives as we can with the course instrument that we have. That's what we're seeking to do here, which would be a significant improvement over what we're currently doing, which is awarding points deep down into the bottom two quintiles, where 81% of those kids are seeing negative change. Are most of those kids not growing? I would guess. But I think that probably in this category, you can get to a place where most of those kids are actually improving.
Okay, the follow-up question is, you've mentioned that we don't have clear indication of when the student has grown 1 year. Do we have a pretty good indication of when a student has grown at least 1 year? I mean, and the question really is, instead of focusing on that exact 1 year, what we're really trying to do is say, did this school do a good job? And did this school not do a good job? If we did a good job, which, you would say is a year, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less, but we're feeling
right
pretty good.
direction.
Right. And this one didn't go in the right direction. Maybe we should focus on that kind of a question instead of the exact, is it 365 and 1/4 days that they produced as a result? Would that help then?
And why is that important, Mr. Garza? What are you getting at there?
Well, because I think it's important because instead of saying, well, we can't measure it, so let's do something else. We can't measure it accurately, exactly. So let's do something else. Maybe it would be good to measure it less accurately and do that and focus on are these sets of schools doing improvement stuff? Are they doing good? And if so, let's reward them with extra points instead of going another route and saying, well, we're going to have some, schools in this group that went up and some that went down, but we got 35%. We got it down to 35%, so that's pretty good. Instead of saying, let's reward some that have 35% and do it that way because it's better than what we're doing now. Maybe is it possible to focus on, we're sure that this school did some good stuff, some good growth. We just don't know if it's a year or a year and a month or 11 months, but it's in that good category, and focus on that instead of reducing the percent of scores that reflect a decrease to 35%.
Yeah, so there's, when you were in school, right, you took your tests, you did all those things, right? And you hope to never get a 0, right? Because a 0 in an average clobbers you, right? Like that's it, right? You get a 0 on one test.
I had that argument this morning with my child, turn in the homework, we'll get a 0.
Yeah,
Well, at least we'll get someone.
because a 40 is much better than a 0.
Exactly.
Did you win the argument?
I don't know yet.
That's hilarious. I'm sure you'll have a follow-up question though. So the question is, for the ones that we're not sure on, do you give 0 or do you give something? Because for the ones that we're not sure on, and that's sort of why I drew this line here, is we're like pretty sure most of these kids, right, there wasn't much, and the thing that you're seeing here is the 19% that grew, the 19% here that saw positive scale score change, their peers saw probably a good amount of improvement, and they just saw, they saw, I'm trying to figure out how to say this in a way that's like clear and not more confusing. These students probably should have grown a lot more, because 80% of their peers grew more than they did. So they're in an area of the test where it was more likely that they should have gone up. If we had been on a vertical scale, we probably would have seen that. So the question is, where are you going to give the 0 at that's going to factor into that school's average?
And you're proposing give it at the 20 to 39%.
Yeah, I think that this is the opening place where you say 0 here, fewer points here, and put this on the 125 scale, and essentially say, well, we're not sure here, but we're like more sure, and we're going to decrease the number of points. It is squarely above average growth here. A small number are seeing negative scale score change, which indicates to me that they're probably students who are in an area of the test that negative scale score change might actually mean that they grew a year, or they grew a year and some change. But what I would hope we wouldn't do, just based off what I've seen, is go here and say all the way up to you're performing better than 50% of your peers, you're getting a 0. Because a 0 in an average is hard. Like, gotta turn in the homework because you gotta get the points. I don't know if that resonates at all. A little bit, yeah.
Gotta think about it.
Yeah.
Is anything we're doing here going to fix the problem in the way we're measuring growth, where a child that needs to grow 2 points every year to get growth to mastery and does that their school gets rewarded, but a child that needs to grow 10 points but who only grew 8, that school gets nothing?
It does not solve that challenge, but
Fix it for me.
well, we gotta fix Mr. Morris's
A
problem.
vertical scale would solve that.
Yep, it would get much closer. Yep. No, it did. Exactly.
I mean,
So-
listen, let's prioritize, like, because part of what we want Thomas to be is a magician. Like, it's hard to solve for what Ronnie's saying and solve for what you're saying, Belinda, so let's stay in that for 30 seconds.
I thought it was the same
They
thing.
actually are the same problem. but
Okay,
yeah.
say that, let me hear it differently.
I'm working on one person at a time. I got one so far, got a half here, trying to get around the table.
Okay, so say that to me, what does that solve?
Solves the problem that she stated. Right now, if Belinda, she's smarter than me, okay? She's only got 2 more steps to go to get to mastery,
Yeah.
okay? I didn't, what'd you go to school?
Elementary school, Secret.
No, university.
Undergrad at the University of Mississippi.
University of
PhD.
Mississippi, I just went to LSU, right? Okay? So we know our literacy goal is ahead of Mississippi, right? But for the purposes of this conversation, she's got 2 steps to go to get to mastery. I got 10 to get there, okay? If I make 8 steps, okay, I don't get there. She's only got to make 2. She gets more points than me. I went 4 times farther than she did, but she gets more points than me.
Okay. Do you want to respond to that, Jim?
Yeah, I'd say we're focusing on, the school got him 8 points and they get no reward. It's not just that he got 8 points.
Yeah.
The school's effort that and child's effort too, but the school's effort that we're trying to focus on.
Yeah, and so the way we're doing it now is punishing schools that are starting with large numbers of students who are showing up for kindergarten really far behind.
Or we're incentivizing schools to not pay attention to this child and focus more attention on a child like you that only has 2 points to grow. It goes back to the bubble issue. The child right on the edge of the bubble is the one that gets focused on.
I don't
Mr.
disagree
Gordon, I
with
think
you.
we got three now. I think we got three. I think we got three. We're making some progress here.
But I think the thing that I would say is that one of the reasons why Chris would say you can't, not you can't.
We should send Kent to Alabama, okay, to start.
Well, but there are things that are not possible, and one of those things that is not possible is by next year, right, having a vertical scale on a new test, et cetera.
I want to get it right. I don't know if it's next year or 6 months from now, whatever. I want to get it right.
So, that's a different, like, we need to decide what we're doing short term and long
Yeah,
term.
there's a short-term plan and a long, so the question is, getting it right, we agree, might be a few years away.
Okay.
What's the first step? And this is the proposal for the first.
Okay, I didn't get that.
Thomas, the vertical alignment will answer both of these questions in incentivizing for the school.
Well, it will become more accurate. I won't say that it's going to be the most precise instrument ever, because Chris will tell you that anything that shown scale score change is going to be coarse. That's why a lot of states that have assessments similar to ours use VAM, and I think that he would say that you can make any of these models, right, with the right test, work the way that you want it to work. You just need the right test and you need the right conditions in the test. I think that as we dig into it, we're going to learn that vertical scales are very expensive. At least that's what folks on my team have said. And you can see whether kids are improving in a couple ways. You can look at results over time. You can look at 3rd grade to 8th grade and say, are more kids by 8th grade at mastery than were at mastery in 3rd grade? You can look at how many kids who are at approaching basic or unsat, and you can look and see as a proxy over time, are we seeing that incremental progress? Even though the vertical scale doesn't exist, you can say, well, by 8th grade, a lot more kids are at mastery than they were in 3rd grade.
I just want to see something that's going to solve Dr. Davis's problem. Call it what you like. I just want to see something that's going to solve her concern.
Yeah. And I think that that could be part of the proposal, right? Or the recommendation is the department should study this, explore costs, come back to the board and discuss it further, and make a decision about, is this where we want to put money, or do we think that we can condition this properly to have a lot more
I don't
confidence?
think money should stop us. I think that we should be able to really know in our budget to be able to do things.
The question is something, as the expert said, there's no gold standard here, that we're using a very defensible and good model that many states use. Like, he said to me in no uncertain terms, y'all shouldn't just change the model because of these other concerns. You need to look at what the underlying root cause issue is and do some tweaking for now, and then study it and do the next thing. But don't rush to change everything, because sometimes when you do that, it creates other problems that.
I'm not advocating to rush, number one. But number two, I want to be clear, are we talking about putting a bandaid on the accountability system? Or are we talking about an accountability system that is gonna best serve the needs of our kids for long term?
I think we're talking about improving, right? This is a proposal to improve it, recognizing that that may happen in a few different stages based on what the expertise is leading us to.
So I just want to be clear on the level of improvement, right?
Yeah.
If it's a Band-Aid or if it's an overhaul. So my understanding is we were looking at the entire scope of the accountability system, right? Which I personally, I took to be potential overhaul if that's appropriate, right? But I'd like to be clear whether or not, particularly when we go back to the board, are we messaging to the board that here's our Band-Aid recommendation, or here's our long-term recommendation, or here's both, right? I just like to make sure we have some clarity there on the improvement.
To follow up on Ronnie's question, my understanding is that you're recommending that we do both. that we're saying, here's a Band-Aid for the next year or two, while the patient is waiting to have surgery to fix the big problem.
Well, I actually would say slightly differently than a Band-Aid, right? Because I think it's important to distinguish adding the right types of questions in the assessment could potentially be the solution that makes it to where we don't need to spend the money on the vertical scale because we can have more confidence, as much confidence likely as what we would get by a vertical scale and not have significant cost. Then it becomes a question of, from an ease of understanding from all of those things, do we want to expend that money in order to get that ease of understanding? Because psychometricians will tell you you can make this just as reliable as you can make the vertical scale. It just might look weird to you, right? It might
Well, so again, I just want to go back to, I want to be able to solve Dr. Davis' problem. And then one of the stated goals that we have is that it's going to be transparent and easy to understand. I don't think we're there yet.
And so you think that adding more questions would result in a solution for my problem? The one that was trying, that says.
it could get us to a place where we could get closer to solving the problem. The issue is that the farther away a kid is from mastery, the larger their goal is going to be, right? So also, there's floor and ceiling effects, right? The closer you are if you're in advanced, you have less room to move up. And if you're in the unsatisfactory category, there's so much more room to grow. And it just depends on why or what the underlying factor is, right? Like, what skills are you behind on, what do you need support on? Some kids that are scoring unsatisfactory 1 year, they wind up being basic the next year because they figure out what is going on and they support them. In other cases, it might take longer for that student. It might be a skill deficit that's much, much deeper. They're all the way at 650, the bottom score, and it takes more time. And the question is, do you do the incremental growth step, which means you have to get really precise on that incremental growth thing, or do you say, the goal to grow is, we're giving you a goal, right? We know that for some students, that goal is going to be really high, really hard, because that kid has a long way to go. If you fall short, we're then going to say, but how much did you make compared to what your peers did? It cuts both ways, right? Like, if that group of kids who are significantly farther behind than other kids are growing faster than their peers that are at basic, then maybe the expectation should be that they grow faster. To your question around who's harder, like for what number of points is it harder to move from to, VAM seeks to do some of that. And the student growth percentiles that are kind of the first step also seeks to do that without being on that vertical scale. So it's not a Band-Aid. It's potentially good medicine that we can also be on a parallel path to explore other options.
Back to a more of a background question. You said that we are not on a scale, we don't have a scale for our test, or we don't in Mississippi and in Florida do. Is the difference there because we're on a PARC test and they are not?
Yes.
That's what I thought we said at the last meeting.
That's right.
Okay, I suggest we keep moving, and then as we do a close, we'll sort of have recommendations next time.
One of the things that has been talked a lot about is the way that growth is weighted, and wanted to give just two quick examples of the way that Florida and Mississippi weight their growth. In the previous simulations that we ran, we weighted growth for most schools at 45%, the same as we weighted achievement. Some schools have fewer students or more students at proficiency, but most schools in the modeling had about 45% of their score based off of growth. So what we did was we pulled Mississippi, because that was part of the conversation, Chris. Y'all have seen this little table, and did that math exercise of how much that we kind of did with a calculator and paper and pencil at the last meeting. What number of their points are based off of absolute achievement versus growth? And in Mississippi, 415 out of the 700 points are growth. 95 of those being, two sets of 95 being the lowest 25% of students in the school, and then the next being all students in the school. So 69% of their points are based off of growth. And Florida weights them roughly evenly. There's an even percentage of points that are for achievement versus growth. And wanted to just share that because it was a topic of conversation. Currently, growth is weighted at 25%, and that is where this conversation started, right? This idea of how much should growth weigh into the formula. I think that it's a logical place for us to continue this conversation as we move toward what the report should look like.
But bottom line, it depends on how you assess growth, right? We provided an example here that says there's a question about the equity in the system as far as actual growth, right? So if we're saying there's some error in the system right now, by increasing the rate of growth, only compounding that error.
Not if you solve two things at the same time.
So I'm trying to separate, right, to make sure we're aware of both.
Right, but if we could tweak or solve the parts of the model that are obviously broken.
So bottom line, you gotta get it right
That's right.
before you start compounding.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, just want to make sure we're clear on that. Okay.
Super clear. Super clear.
While we're talking about the Mississippi model, which has two different growth components, all students growing and the lowest 25% growing, and going back to what we talked about, the very first slide, or second slide, about trying to keep this simple so that parents can understand it. Something that I don't think I mentioned last time is that I think the Mississippi model is bordering on, my view, everybody else can have their own feeling, but bordering on too complex to be able to easily explain it. I feel like if I were trying to tell somebody growth, well, it depends on what growth you're talking about. We do it, growth this way, and we also do it this way. So, just suggesting we keep in mind, keeping it simple may be more important than getting it perfect, because we're going to be explaining this to a lot of people.
The other thing
And if you lose them, what difference does it make if it's perfect?
The other thing that I would
They have
add
no
is-
faith in it.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add is there are other places where their model is really, really, really simple to the point of making you go, it might be too simple and not able to measure the things that we want. For example, the strength of diploma proposal, right, that we looked at last meeting and it's going to be back here again. Theirs is like you get points or you don't get points, and there's like one bucket, and it's you get a credential, you get a dual enrollment credit with a C- or better, like any of those things, and you get full credit. Which what we put out is more rigorous than that. The question is ours too rigorous? Is theirs not rigorous enough? Should ours be as simple as theirs, or is there something to gain by a little bit of complexity here?
Well, I would say, I feel that it's fairly simple to explain to parents that if you get a high school diploma, you get this many points, but if you get a high school diploma plus a credential, you get this many. It's more complicated, but it's easy to explain. And if you get a high school diploma plus an associate's degree, it's more complicated if you get more points, but that is intuitive and easy to explain.
And I agree. That's why I gave that example. There are places where complexity makes
It's easy to
sense
explain.
and it's easy to understand.
Right.
Yep.
Do you have the equivalent for growth in your mind, Jim?
Well, having growth for all students and not for both all students and the lowest 25% would be a simpler model.
Even if we want to incentivize the most growth that occurs behind students, how do you?
Well, if you give an incentive for growth for all students, and if you give a reward for each small step that those students make, then the lowest students, which should be easier to grow several steps because they have so many steps available, would automatically get more points because.
They have further to go.
Right.
So you're a proponent, this is not on the record, we're not obviously, but of the step, those steps are attracted to you for that reason, because of its simplicity.
An equal weight for growth in small increments or steps, yes.
Yeah.
I think we have 3 solids on board now.
We're not looking votes, it's just discussion. So, go ahead.
We basically just had this conversation. So the expert consumer assessment His advice was to continue using our band model and create the conditions to make a shift in the future possible. What would reactions be to what we kind of just talked about? I kind of know what the reactions are at this point, because Mr. Morris always takes us down the path of where I'm going, and I appreciate that about him. A model that would minimize or eliminate non-student growth, calibrate the points awarded for the different tiers for exceeding their peers, which was that eliminating the bottom quintile or the bottom quintile, 2 quintiles and a half, I don't know. Calibrating to different tiers and asking our state psychometric advisors, assessment vendors, and future assessment working group to explore how our tests can be improved to accommodate a transition table approach like what Florida and Mississippi use in the future. To explore it, come up with a short-term solution and a long-term solution.
I just think Jim's point about simplicity or is, you know, maybe easier to as a potential, this is something to consider since that's come up a couple times as a potential principle rather than pertinent to it.
Should there be somewhere in here too, a discussion about whether or not we need to increase growth from where it is today? So maybe, if that can still be simple and not do the lower 25% maybe something special, but we could increase the weight of growth if we, become confident that we're doing a better job of measuring it, even if it's not perfect so far.
Do we think there's a world where doing the top two things, because the third thing is just the next step, the top two things underneath that second bullet, minimizing and eliminating as much non-student growth as possible, and calibrating point awards for those different tiers, a little bit differently, could get people comfortable enough with the model? Like, is there a world, or is that just like not even worth going down the path? Don't waste your time, energy, not gonna happen.
Another question I would ask myself, I would put my teacher hat on. And I would say, hey, if I'm a teacher, I'm a great teacher, I'm doing a great job, I know I'm making a difference in the child's life. I work with this child for a whole year, and I look back and I reflect back on my year, and I say, okay, does my accountability score actually reflect the work in this child's life? And I cannot understand that, right? To me, that's one of the fundamental things that we need to accomplish. We need to put something in place that teachers understand, that they know that their work adds value and it gets recognized. And if it doesn't do that, then I don't think it's doing its job.
I think that
Because I gotta feel good about what I'm doing, right? Especially when I'm doing really good work.
I think that I would say that my experiences as a teacher and talking to teachers would be different than yours. That most teachers would say, what do we know about the struggles, challenges, and difficulties that the young person that I'm teaching comes with? How much did they grow based off of where they started and all of the other factors we know about them?
Isn't that incremental growth?
But doing it based off of just this point to this point does not take into account any of the other factors that are going on in that young person's life. And many teachers would say to you, I think that if you walked into a school and said, do you think that it's as simple as this number of points to this number of points, and that judges the teacher? I think that they would say that that's not the system that they necessarily would want. Since you brought up, I want to see, my work reflected here.
Well, it doesn't make any sense to me if I'm a teacher and I'm doing a great job, but yet you tell me I'm at an F school. That doesn't make sense to me as a teacher.
I think that's a different.
It's a reflection on my work.
What you said, I think what I heard you say was that a teacher wants to see the value that they added to that young person rewarded and recognized. That's what I thought that I heard. Not said exactly.
I want to see it appropriately evaluated, right?
Yep. So what value-added measures seek to do is look at all the factors that we know and determine how much value did that adult add to that child's experiences. That's what value-added measures are designed to do. They're designed to say, based on everything that we know, what was expected to happen for this kiddo, what actually happened. And the assumption is that whatever the delta between what was expected and what happened is the work of that teacher. So I think that you could go down the path of doing the scale score change. But I think the question of, is that how a teacher wants to be evaluated? I don't know that they would say that they agree with you or with me, but my experiences with teachers would say they want all of the factors that we know taken into account.
So this is interesting because we'll have stakeholder engagement. And I think there's opportunity to talk to teachers and really gather their input. But to your last point about the at school, like a teacher who is making significant growth in at school, doesn't that speak more to the weighting challenge? Like, isn't part of why that would be true, that in fact the growth that they're getting with their students is in fact not reflective? Because of the percentage. Is that and so ultimately they'd be in enough school and be making 2 years of growth year over year, and you're saying that that's a challenge as well.
Because it's not being recognized appropriately. This is just because, like we just said, one of the problems we identified is today, I could have an A in growth, but I'm an F school. That's my whole point.
And
That's your last bullet.
And I love how Mr. Morris takes us right where we're going, which is this question of thinking about both short and long term. Should all schools be able to improve a letter grade for strong growth, 2 letter grades? And of course, this is like based off of the question, can we get the growth measure to be something that we have faith in, enough faith in to be able to do this? If we could do that, should they be able to grow a letter grade, go from an F to a D? Should they be able to grow 2 letter grades, F to a C? Should they be able to go from an F to an A? And I think that's a question that folks have to grapple with.
But bottom line, shouldn't we, I'm just asking a question, I don't know the answer, shouldn't we be able to define each letter grade? This is an A. If you're in school, this is what you've done, right? If you're an F school, this is the description of an F school, right? You fit. And so one of the things that, I would think with an F school, if you've got an A for growth, it can't be an F school. It's impossible by definition. I would think that's one of the things we want to do as an accountability group, is we want to define each letter grade. So there's clarity. And if I'm the principal and I've got a C school right now, and I want to be a B school, right? I know what I have to do to be a B school.
It would
by definition.
I love a good definition, right? I love one. When you're talking about a formula, it's really hard to say that these things are true for an A. You can say for this indicator, this is an A. You can say that for to be an A on the growth model, to be an A for the growth model, you have to be in the 60th percentile or better on BESE. You can say that to be a B, you have to be in the 40th percentile or better, right? Like you can do those definitions, but then it becomes a question of when you average this and this,
right?
Like the
complexity,
compounding variables make it hard to be able to say that.
I get it.
So you have to talk about them like individually, and that's this question of
How far can you move?
Right, how far can you move?
Yeah.
And still be honest with the public about how that school's doing, differentiate how that school's doing from other schools, and also recognize that, to some people it's not fair. You're a teacher working hard, all the teachers are working hard in that school, they're growing kids, and they've still got that F level. Right? Like the 2 things sit in tension, which is why I gave you all the hard question.
So this is where the weight comes in, right? Like how much we decide the weight of growth is going to matter will help us determine whether or not those schools are capable of moving 1 letter grade to be a growth or adjustment.
Okay. Any more discussion here before we keep going?
I know it's a hard question. I think we should zero in on that question a little bit.
Okay. And say the question one more time, Brett. Like,
Should a school be able to improve a letter grade, 2 letter grades, be an A, be a C? Is it 1 letter grade, is it 2?
Thomas, wouldn't it depend on where they're, what do we call them? The growth score, letter grade, what's the opposite, what's the other?
Achievement.
Achievement, okay. If the achievement is an A, then there's no way a school can move 2 letter grades, no matter how good their growth score is.
Yep.
So it almost is a question that can't be answered.
If a school's an F for achievement, and they're an A for growth,
what's their average.
What should their
Bottom line,
average
you're trying to put some borders around how
Yep.
much of an impact cane growth have.
Yep.
Right?
Because I gotta come back and help land this plane, so I need to know kind of
So what's
everything
your
that we've heard.
recommendation for the weight of growth? I mean,
Yeah.
or the limits, the range for the weight of growth?
Yeah.
25 to 45 or whatever.
And different states do it different ways. Florida, Mississippi weights it more. They weight growth more than achievement.
I'll just go back to my previous comment that you got to correct the problem before you start compounding the effect.
But assuming that we can get to a place where there's an A through F distribution of growth, assuming that we can get to that place, assuming that we can get to a place where we have confidence in it, what do we think is fair, right? What do we think is right for the public communication, for the school that's gonna get the grade?
I think you have to run some cases and give us some feedback on some cases and say, hey, you run it at this weight, this is what your outcome is. You run it another way, this is what your outcome is. We have to prove that it's feasible, it's got to pass the red face test, right?
Well, I want to go about this a different way instead of running 85,000 more simulations, right? The question is, like directionally, are we zeroing in on a letter grade, 2 letter grades, or 4 letter grades that they can be able to improve? Because that, like, I could run it every different way, but all that's going to tell you is how the letter grade distribution changes. It doesn't tell you what's right or what you think is right.
Going back to the question of keeping things simple enough to explain to people. If you're trying to explain to people how we're working the system, how we're evaluating or valuing growth versus status,
Yeah.
if you say we're valuing growth 50% and we're valuing status 50%, that's an easy explanation to make versus, well, we made it so that you can jump 2-letter grades or 3-letter grades in certain situations, but not in other situations, because if you start out as an A, you can't, that's too much
No,
to explain.
No,
Like
that's
50-50 or 45-55, that's easy to explain.
well, we can go about the question that way. Like, what percent do you think it should be? I was going about it like, what's the goal here, right? Do we want a school to be able to grow from an F to an A based off of growth? And that will help me
Well,
get to, is it 50-50?
If it's 50-50, then if you think about it, you can grow, you should be able to grow 2-letter grades if you have a really high score
Yep.
and an F.
Yep.
So I'm just trying to re-highlight we got to explain this to people at some point.
Yep.
That's an important factor to consider also.
Right, we will arrive at a percentage. The question is, how do we arrive at that percentage? We could run 25 cases and see how the results turn out, or we could say, this is what we think is the right thing to be able to be true at the end, and then let's see what the cases run out when you do that is. So the question is, do you think that a school that's an F for achievement should be able to be a D, a C, a B, or an A, or don't know, but at least be able to move 2 points or 2 whatever?
I mean, I'll just say for me, I had a parent who called me and asked me about their neighborhood school, and they said, you know, what should I look at? And I said, you should look at their progress index, because that's telling you what those teachers are doing to grow kids, and their achievement is just telling you the socioeconomic status of the kids when they started out in kindergarten, right? I mean, like you've shown us those correlations. And so for me, when I'm thinking about what a parent ought to be prioritizing, it is, are teachers growing the kids when they come in the door at kindergarten? And that's, to me, the most important thing about our accountability system. And so I think that at the very least, growth ought to be 50%. I mean, and I know the politics of it, right? Because we also have to think about, right, everybody who's going to throw their hands up in the air and say that, well, now you have too many A and B and C schools, and so you can't do that, right? That somehow we're lowering standards. But in my mind, what we're doing is we're changing our priority in the accountability system to highlight schools that are moving kids when they get them in the doors.
So
Let me throw out another thought also. If you were to go with something simple like 50-50, with school had an F status and an A growth, it would come out roughly as a C plus. A C plus, it doesn't quite say the school is really doing a good job because they're growing kids a lot, but the school can also tell parents to put on their website, we are an A school in growth. So the end score doesn't tell the whole story, and I would argue it doesn't have to tell the whole story, because the rest of the story can still be told.
Absolutely. That makes sense.
Thomas, help me understand, that we're discussing the letter grades at this point. Did it make a difference once we received the vertical? With that support of how
It wouldn't make,
any difference?
the only thing that it would make a difference on is the short versus long term, right? If we didn't have enough faith in what the changes that we're able to make to improve the VAM step, then there would become a question of, in the long run, when we get to a vertical scale, what would people be comfortable with? My gut based off this conversation is that folks think that an A is too far, right? And again, we're talking about difference between a 0 being an F versus, is that school a 0, or are they a 50, or a 40?
Well, if they're a 0,
Right.
then they should be able to become an A.
Right, so,
I
right.
mean, they shouldn't be able to become a B.
Right, so it becomes this like incremental step toward this, and it sounds like where we landed is 50-50 might seem like the right amount, but it doesn't seem like moving from an F to an A is the answer, but somewhere between is the answer. The other thing,
I thought we said that the accountability system was, because of the technology in the world today, right, everything's progressing so fast, we're just trying to keep up with it. And so this accountability system is something that is a living, basically a living system, right? It's going to be moving. And so we would expect these weights to be changing, right, as our students progress, right? As we have more A and B schools, right, in the system, we would expect to be making some adjustments to the accountability system. Yes or no?
I would expect that, sure, there would be adjustments to the accountability system, but the direction that you're going in seems maybe more along the lines of changes to like triggers in the formula that when scores start moving, the cut point for a D moves.
That's right. So that's my point, right, is it's going to move, right, as your status changes, right, your accountability system is going to change with it, right, so that you're always growing.
Yep.
That's the idea, right? So I would get back to, okay, where does our grade distribution reflect where we think we are right now relative to the bar? Where will we set the bar? If we think we've got the bar set perfectly right now, we should see a pretty good bell curve, I would think, right? If we think the bar is much higher than where we are, then we would think that that bell curve is weighted on the back end. You would have more B and C schools than you would A and B schools, right? So I would think that you would want your the weight of the different components of your system, right, to have an outcome that's going to reflect your distribution curve. It says, this is the quality of my education system today, relative to wherever I set the bar.
But it's this question of growth versus achievement, and those two things help you to figure out what the letter grades will look like.
That's right.
And then help you figure out, well, you have to figure out the cut points to help figure out the.
That's right. And you run enough cases to show, right, what my distribution curve looks like, and then this is reasonable or not.
So what's the request, Ronnie? Like, what would be helpful to have in front of us as a work group to advance this particular part of the discussion? Like, is there a simulation that you think would help?
Well, I think first of all, you have to agree where you're going to set the bar, right? And if you agree that where we are today is fine, status quo is great, then you'd expect to see a perfect bell curve, right? That's when we go to the classroom, that's what we're looking at, right? At a perfect bell curve. But if you say, no, the bar's not where we want it right now, we're expecting something more, right? Then I would expect with the current accountability system that we would see a shift in that bell curve. You'd see a larger distribution, right, of B's and C's than you would A's and B's. So if you run the simulation with a 50% weight on growth, and you come up with a bell curve that shows, oh, with that, I got a perfect bell curve. And you think that's where we should be today, that reflects the quality of our system, right? Then, okay, great, that's your answer. But if your growth weight is 25%, you're gonna get a different distribution, and it's gonna reflect the health of your system, whatever that grade distribution is. Like right now, we're having the conversation about, wow, 70% of the high schools are A or a B, right? But 2/3 of the students can't read a grade level. That doesn't feel right, right? So why do we have that disparity between the high schools and the middle schools? That's a conversation we're having today. So I'm saying this is the same similar conversation. We should be comfortable with what that bell curve looks like relative to where we're setting the bar.
I think, go ahead.
But I don't know that we can do that, Ronnie, and value growth the way we've been talking about valuing growth. Because I would expect, right, the distribution that you're looking for, right, we would think that our achievement distribution is going to be skewed towards more C's and D's, right, the lower end, because we know where we stand nationally on the NAEP and all of those other things.
Right.
But the distributional growth might be more heavily skewed towards A, B's, and C's.
Okay.
Right? Why? Because we have so many children living in poverty that are showing up with barriers to educational achievement that need to be overcome and they're not ready for kindergarten.
Right.
And so I think that to talk about what you're doing, those are two different distributions, and that when we average them together, right, they're not going to give you what you want. Like what you're looking for is the distribution that you should see when you only look at achievement letter grades. That is going to show.
I think you want to look at overall health of your system, and your grade distribution should be some reflection on the overall health of your system.
But it depends on how you're defining health. Are you defining health by where kids are starting out? Are you defining health by how much you're growing? Or is it some combination of the two, which is what we're arguing?
It
right?
is, and I agree it is a combination of the two. But
So
the
then
final score should give consideration to how much we're growing kids, right? We should also give consideration to whether or not kids are at grade level or not, right? And those two together should give us the overall health of our system.
How would that be determined though? Like what would you be suggesting would determine the perfect distribution?
I think that you look at, whenever you run your case, whatever weight you decide to put on growth, okay? And that assumes you stay with the same system, right? Because if you go to incremental growth, then you're saying, ooh, I can give a kid 4 times the credit if they go 4 times as far as the other student, right? So your weight is captured that way,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to what we're doing right now, okay, relative to some target. So if you run the case, you run the simulation, and you put some number on weight, 40% or 50% or whatever the number is, and you run your simulation, and your grade distribution comes out skewed, we've got 70% A's and B's, does that pass the red-based test? I would say no. Okay, well, let's take some weight off from that 40% we started out with and move it to 35%. What does our distribution look like? Can we pass the red-face test then?
But that's not telling us anything about what we value, right? Like, and so if we're supposed to be motivating, the accountability system is to provide information to parents about how well their school is doing and to motivate the teachers in the room. I think that the problem that we're going to run into is that if we increase the weight of growth, and it increases the number of A and B schools that we have, because we're getting rid of that school that right now is an F in achievement, but is an A in growth, right? You're not gonna like that, I don't think. And, right, because it is going to, your mind, you're gonna say that that is not reflecting how well we're doing academically, but compared to the rest of the country. But the indicators, but that's because we're valuing moving kids, because we know that we have kids that are showing up, are not ready to learn to a greater degree than most all other states in the country.
Right. So I agree with what you're saying, but I would go back to the 2 points we already made, which is number one, I don't think you can have an A in growth and be an F school. So we should define that. By definition, that cannot be an F school. If I got an A in growth, it can't be an F school.
We have to do that mathematically.
Well, you could do it by rule.
I just want anybody to help me with any part of the answer to this. So bell curve, we got to start from somewhere, otherwise I'm gonna have to go figure this out by myself, or with my team upstairs. So like your point is well taken, right? We're not ranked in the top 10 schools, states in the country for sure.
We're 48.
Yeah. So
If
we're
there's any
48.
question there, we're 48.
48.
Yep.
What should, from your perspective, right? Because otherwise I was gonna have to go figure this out myself. From your perspective, what should that bell curve distribution look like when you're 48?
That there should be more B's and C's than there are A's and B's. That should be pretty clear.
But should there,
You can't tell me there shouldn't be a shift to the left?
I'm just trying to get you to help me figure out how much of a shift to the left.
Yeah. I'd say you have to talk to some more experts. I'm just kind of going back to where you were before was, hey, let's go the right direction. Let's make sure we're going the right direction first. Right now we're skewed to the right, and it's the wrong way.
Jim?
Yeah. Throw out this point, or this idea, this thought. If we were really going to have letter grades that reflected where we stand nationally, I think we would have like 90% of our schools being D's and F's, if we're ranked 48. So to try and go that route, I think would be detrimental because it would be just devastating to the schools. On the other end, my understanding generally is that a bell-shaped curve has maybe 10% of the schools being A's, 20% being B's. What's the remainder? 30 to 40% being C's, and then you go, similarly in the other direction. I think that is what, this is my gut feeling, that's what people expect us to produce as our result, that we will produce a result in this system where 10% of the schools are A's, 20% are B's, even though they know that we're at the bottom nationally. I think that tells a story of how this school in Louisiana compares to that school in Louisiana. What job is this school in Louisiana doing compared to that school? And it's not really supposed to tell the story about how we're doing nationally. It's supposed to, in my mind, tell the story of how our school over here is doing compared to this school over there. Partly so the parents can make a choice. Do I want to live in this district, or do I want to move my house to this district, or should I have choice in schools to pick this school over that school? So my gut feeling is that a bell-shaped distribution with 10%, 20%, and so on would be the way to go. And you can achieve that regardless of what percentage of growth you place into the calculation. Because you can have a letter grade for growth, and by definition, say 10% of those schools, we're going to start, the year with 10% expected based on past performance to be A's, 20% to be B's. And then for status, do the same. We're going to make the cutoff for an A wherever it needs to be, so that based on what the schools did last year, they'll have 10% A's, 20% B's. And when we combine the two, no matter what percentage we use to make the combination happen, it could be 75% for growth, 20% for status, or the reverse. We can, by definition, say whatever the result is, 10% of our schools, the top 10 are going to be A's, the next 20% are going to be B's, based on last year's performance, and then let the schools work their students, whatever, however they decide. It could end up that they do a better job and it shifts everybody just a little bit higher. All those cutoffs may end up, producing schools where we have 15% A's and 25% B's, and then build into the formula, as has been mentioned, once every 3 years, look to see if we are skewed. And if we are skewed with, 40% A's and B's, then let's change the cutoff so that, based on what they did last year, or the last 3 years, we should have 10% A's, 20% B's. And then let them feel the competition with each other and, you know, produce better results, hopefully, than what we expect, and end up again with 15% A's, 25% B's, and then 3 years later, look at it again. If we're skewed, adjust it again, automatically.
That would be the simplest approach, is just maintain a bell curve all the time, right? That would be the simplest approach, is that you just have to be clear with your understanding with your stakeholders that, you know, this reflects the bell curve distribution of our system. It's no indication of our status relative to our national ranking.
And yet it would still incentivize schools
that.
to overperform, because you're not evaluating every year, we're going to have 10%. We're just saying, this is what we're shooting for,
Yeah.
and we're adjusting it every few years as we
You
go
have a
along.
timeline, so they know.
But so, right.
Either timeline or automatically, if you end up with 40% A's and B's, then, you know, it doesn't have to take 3 years for us to wait until we adjust it.
But, so here's like my problem with a forced norming to a bell curve, is that competition can be a good thing and it can be an incentivizer, but it also can lead to perverse incentives. And I'm looking at these men on this back row who were superintendents, and you're now making me compete against the district next to me. And if I come up with the best practices that is moving kids on the lead, where is my incentive to share it with my neighbor because you just made him my enemy? I can't be an A and have my neighbor be an A and my other neighbor be an A because you have created an accountability system that pits me against them. And then I'll also say, like if I did this in my classroom where I failed 30 to 40% of my students, LSU would be calling me into the office because my DFW rate was too high, and parents would be lighting my phone up because their kids were losing tops, not because they didn't know the material, but I had created this arbitrary system where I had to have so many B's and F's.
I like your point about the lack of collaboration.
Would argue that that's really saying bad stuff about teachers, to say that if they knew something, a good way to teach a child, they would hide it from
No,
other
it says
people.
bad things about our accountability.
I don't think teachers would hide a good thing from someone across the parish line. I think they would share it.
But why do we have to, if we think that that's true, why do we even have an accountability system that we think is the thing that motivates them to do their job?
The accountability system is to show parents how the school is
No,
doing.
that's not what it says here on our sheet. It says to motivate the
People in the building.
the people in the building.
It's part of it.
It is a big part.
Just like giving letter grades to children in a class motivates them. And, you know, to some extent, it creates competition between students. But I know my daughter talks to her friends all the time, even though, you know, she's somewhat competing against them to get an A. They have class projects, group projects, where they have to work together. So having competition doesn't prevent people from working together to get a good result across parish lines.
But it doesn't incentivize it, right? If it's a forced norming.
It's hard, isn't it?
Well, yeah, my take on this is that it's our job to get kids to proficiency. So how does that fit in with the bell curve?
Well, and if it were a forced bell curve, as in, if we were to say, no matter what happens this year, we are only going to have 10% A's. That's not what I described. What I described was, based on what schools did last year, we're going to set the bar so that we would anticipate if they did the same thing, 10% A's. But if they do better than last year, then it could be 15% A's. So it's not forced in that sense. Whatever better the schools do, they could produce more A's, more B's. Or if they do worse than last year, we could have less A's.
I'm practicing to be an attorney, so how would the argument that you made be different in terms of using a fan-based model that pits schools against each other in terms of percentile ranking than the argument you just
No,
made?
I don't like that either.
Like, I mean,
What do you like? You like the vertical approach?
I like,
Is that what I'm hearing?
like, I want
Keep hearing that
the-
during this meeting.
I mean, I want the kid that moves 2 points to be rewarded, but I want the kid that moves 8 points to be rewarded more, regardless of how far away they started from mastery.
That's true growth.
So, I mean, and I feel your pain, right, because we're asking, we're criticizing something that A, you didn't design, and, test-wise, and B, that can't be fixed immediately, but,
And there's 11 different versions of what's best that you have to answer to, because we have 11 members. So,
But wait, but this is important because there's actually more that we're agreeing on and disagreeing on. So can someone just summarize, maybe Thomas, so like, what do you hear that is kind of holistic that people agree on?
Long term, we love a vertical scale idea or a way to measure incremental growth in a way that we can be comfortable with. Short term, if we can minimize negative scale score change, we can make the growth model work for now and put things in place so that people can feel confident in the growth model, that people believe that a school that's an F for achievement and an A for growth shouldn't be an F. They could potentially be a D and potentially a C. So 2 letter grades of improvement is essentially what I think I took away from
And
it.
what did you take away about the distribution conversation?
I think that there's a coalescence around this idea that there should be a bell-shaped curve of some type that could reflect the degree to which we are ranked in the country, 48th. But more so, I heard that we should set a distribution and monitor it over time and have the cut points change as things get better, but not the same year. So if everybody's like working hard, they would get credit in that year, but the next year or the year after, the standard would improve, the standard would increase.
If it gets too skewed.
If it gets,
If
okay.
it doesn't get too skewed, then, you could have, like I said, 25% A's and B's, or 25% B's, 15% A's.
What's
Not too bad.
skewed?
Well, I've heard some people say before, 40% A's and B's seem skewed. So I throw that number out there and ask if y'all agree that 40% would be too much. And
Well, I think when we started this whole
if
conversation.
so, we could maybe agree that 40% is where you look at it again and maybe adjust it.
If we look back on the sequence of events how we got here, then the original weight was 25%. The accountability commission recommended 48%. Superintendent Rowley came back at 36%, right? And you ran some simulations for all those, and you showed the shift in the distribution curve, right?
That predates me, but they did, yes.
Okay, so there's a really good example of what we're talking about, right? Whenever you increase the weight by X, you saw the shift in the distribution curve. People said, whoa, that's a lot. And how are we gonna go back and tell the public that we got 25% more A's and B's right now, but we're still 48th in the country? Well, we got 25% more A's and B's. You know, that doesn't feel good to me.
That was based on,
That was before we realized that we were giving points for any of this, right? So
Right,
that,
but I'm just gonna cover the concept, right? The concept is,
But the
we gotta feel
concept was-
comfortable with what the curve looks like,
okay,
right?
the concept was the challenge was we couldn't feel confident that that was actually legitimately accurate because of this challenge, right? That's why if somebody did vote for it, like, to me, this challenge makes it hard for me to accept just a weighting increase.
Right,
because-
right, because you got growth wrong with the base case.
Correct.
Right? And you're just gonna compound a bad problem.
Exactly.
we can talk.
Which means our distribution our grade distribution is wrong in the first place, so it shouldn't bother us if the distribution changes because the distribution wasn't accurate in the first place.
Gotta
So
fix- gotta fix-
comparing it to what we had before doesn't make a lot of sense because we know that we weren't doing things the right way in the first place.
That's fair. I agree with that.
So what I heard generally was a bell curve type distribution that might skew a little bit this way, but generally bell curve, and some kind of policy around triggers that cause improvement, or when improvement happens, the expectation increases over time, but there is some dissension there. There's potentially a dissenting opinion in the report mentioned.
I mean, because maybe we, with Fidelity, implement the science of reading, and in 8 years, all of a sudden, we are making drastic gains in literacy, and we start to see those results filter into our other subject matters, because, you know, you can't even do math at high school without being on the grade level. And so I just want to make sure that the trigger thing bothers me, because if we do see the growth, right, we're not going to reward schools over the long term for that growth if we believe that there's some trigger that at some point we automatically have to have so many B's and F's, right? Because mathematically then it's possible, right, and I would love to have this problem, that we could have a school that had everybody reading at basic, mastery, or advanced, and they would still be an F if you carry the norming to its obvious conclusion.
Would you agree that once the literacy program is fully implemented in those cohorts that pass through 6 years of school, that we would have more A's and B's?
That we would have more A's and B's, yes.
That would reflect a shift in our curve, right, relative to the progress that we've made.
And so that maybe it should not be artificially flattened by us, by norming it.
I would agree with you I would agree with you in the future when we get this right and we're not 48th. That feels like a problem that I hope to be here long enough to tackle with another group of board members. Like, it just doesn't feel like a today problem. It feels like a nice to have problem one day.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to point that out. I think it took Mississippi roughly 8 years to get to where they are. So that's 2 BESE boards from now. And they got to roughly the halfway mark, 50th percentile. They ranked, I think, 25th in reading. So that would justify a perfect Bell score. If you're at the halfway between top and bottom of the nation, then you really should have, you know, the normal bell-shaped curve of your schools, which is what we're proposing to have, or what I propose to have today. You would just be catching up to what we had been doing for the last 8 years. And only then would you say, well, if we grow even more, then maybe we should have more A's and B's than what we said 8 years ago. And that's, again, that's just my take on the situation.
Okay, so let's do a quick little process check. We've had a very robust discussion, and hopefully we've given you the feedback that would be helpful. Yes, us, but I know you're carrying the actual, you gotta do the heavy lifting on the next step. Here's my question. Do people feel resolved enough to move on to high school at this point? Or is there something more that you feel like has to be on the record instead? Okay, let's go.
So high school.
That's if we, when we meet back in a couple of weeks, we'll either have
Yeah,
a discussion again with maybe voting.
Yeah, my next step is come up with a way to potentially satisfy people's concerns so that we could do something like increase the weight of growth and have like a good, reliable growth measure that's based off of our existing growth measure. So that is the next step for me, a simulation, exactly.
Right, so with that simulation, and I'm assuming that you will provide us with what the distribution curve looks
Yep.
like, right?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
My concern with that, Ron, and David and the other one, is like, if we remember where this discussion started, it could be, your request could be misinterpreted as you trying to artificially impact the distribution to create more A and B schools, which is not at all what anybody in this room at this table has said, but that was when the growth conversation began, right? You'll recall that lots of the pushback was, we're trying to influence the distribution just to make us look better than we are. And I don't hear you saying that, but I think when we start to sort of prioritize manufacturing a curve, it could be argued that that's what the intent of the board is, which is not what is the intent of this work group, and if you're paying attention, you realize that's not at all it, but that's actually where this discussion goes on.
No, I just want to be clear that I think the distribution curve should reflect the health of the system.
And don't tell us eventually how
back,
healthy
and
it
back
is.
to Dr. Davis's point, right, whenever the literacy program kicks in, and we look 6 years from now, and we're ahead of Mississippi, right, then that distribution curve should look different than it looks today. We should see more A and B schools then than we do today. And that's an indication of our progress.
All right, great, let's keep going.
Okay, high school. So I've talked with folks that run schools. I've visited with one with Mr. Morris. We've got feedback from a variety of folks. I'm still receiving it. And wanted to just put a table together that talks about feedback that we've gotten since the initial putting out of this. The first one was perceived devaluation of the diploma. Currently, the diploma is weighted about half the formula, and this proposal would decrease the weight of that and instead increase the weight on experiences beyond the diploma. So we want to give the concern and how we would respond to the concern having developed the proposal. I want to see if that resonates with people. The concern that people perceive it to devalue the diploma. Would it be able to see the proposal again before we go through the list of concerns?
I think we should, let's do it.
So it's on slide 18. I don't know why this thing's skewed, but essentially we are awarding no points in the strength of diploma index or the college and career acceleration index or whatever you choose to call it for students when they graduate because we've already awarded points for that in the graduation rate. There's a concern from people that devalues or signals the wrong thing about how much we value our diploma. My response to that is that we're not devaluing the diploma. We are just no longer talking about the diploma in the college and career acceleration or the strength diploma index because we've already given credit to the kid graduated in the graduation index. Does that resonate with people or?
The sensitivity that I've got, the feedback I've got on that one is, if Thomas, what is it, 50 points, if you just get the diploma, is that where we're at?
You get the graduation rate and the graduation rate index.
Right.
And then you get 0 points.
Right, but it's 50 points for the index, right, is what you get proposed.
You get, in the strength of the, I didn't do that. In the strength that, somebody is brilliant, Max is brilliant.
All the credit there.
So where I was going was that, I've got a lot of feedback that if you're going to give less points for the high school diploma, then you're obviously going to provide opportunity to give more points in excess of the high school diploma, right? So now we get into quality of the diploma. So the concern that I heard from folks is, in rural areas, I may not have the resources that somebody does in Baton Rouge, right, where I can just send kids to a Baton Rouge Community College for enrollment, or I can send them to get a Class 2 welding certification, because I don't have those resources, in Bucky, Louisiana, let's say. So where is my opportunity, right, to get that quality points that are being proposed? That's feedback that I've gotten that I think is worth conversation.
What do people think? To what degree, based off of where a school system is located, should the expectation on what the credentials are that young people get change? That would be my response back to the group, like.
And how do you assure equal opportunity, really, right? Regardless of where you are, if you're gonna set the scale, you've got to be something that's achievable. I think that's reasonable. If you're gonna set a scale, it's got to be something that's achievable. So I certainly am a proponent of high-quality diploma, right? There should be something more than a white piece of paper with my name on it. I should have some skill that's going to make me job ready for a good paying job, or it should prepare me for college, one of the two. So we got to come up with a means to do that. So how do we put an accountability system in place that does that, and at the same time, it's achievable?
We spent a lot of time on 3 through 8, so I think that an elementary school example might be a good one around this like resource thing, just kind of create complexity here where there is already complexity. An elementary school might say to you, my system, young people come to kindergarten, not kindergarten ready. I can't move my achievement forward as much as a place where young people have more access to pre-K. Should our accountability system provide free pre-K in order to level that playing field in the same way that potentially the direction you were going would try to level the high school?
No, I wasn't going in any particular direction, I was just stating a concern.
Well, if we satisfied that concern in a way that changed the expectation based off where people are, or added additional.
Right. So we address the 3 through 8 concern by providing more resources, right? We're meeting the resource need that hasn't been there previously, right? As opposed to shifting the accountability system from 3 through 8.
Well, that is a potential solve, right?
But I mean, that's what we did for 3 through 8, right? I mean, that's my understanding with the literacy programs and early childhood education. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're putting more resources in that area, right, to address the lack of resources and to make it a more level playing field so that opportunity is the same for everybody and the rewards are scaled the same for everybody.
So let me make sure I understand your point a little bit better. You're not saying that because a system is rural and it's harder to do dual enrollment, that dual enrollment shouldn't be the expectation. You are just saying we should provide resources to them so they understand how to offer dual enrollment?
Right.
Like what are the, okay.
That's exactly what I'm saying, okay? And so I'm saying, ideally, I don't know if it's possible or not, but ideally, we should be doing the same thing we're doing with 3 through 8, right? With early childhood education and so forth.
Like a manual.
And making sure that those resources are there, right? So that the reward system that we're putting in place is in fact achievable. And I realize, you're not going to be able to offer, the same classes at every school in the state, right? It's got to be something that's reasonable, it's got to be something that's manageable. But that's the feedback I've gotten is, hey, help me understand, right? What can I offer my kids if I'm in a rural area and I want them, to get the best opportunities possible? Give me some sense of confidence that that's achievable.
And how do I pay for it?
How do I pay for it? Yeah, and all that, right? So I like the quality that's on the board right there, right, on the wall. I like the quality there, the opportunity that's there, regardless of which pathway you choose. If you choose Jumpstart, and you choose TOPS graduation, right? There's a lot of quality opportunities for quality education there, which is super, right? But the feedback I've gotten is, hey, all this stuff isn't offered where I live, right? So how do I deal with that?
Yeah. Most of these categories have an option where AP and CLEP play a big part in it. And so I wanted to ask, don't we have online options for AP courses and CLEP courses so that even the rural districts can take the online option regardless of how rural they are? Or,
So that would be for the TOPS university pathway, right?
well, I see AP on the 100 mark, AP at the 125 mark, AP at 75. It's in all of the categories.
I think that the area where I've heard the most feedback on this, and there's another one that talks about implementing and cost and resources,
Right.
is Jumpstart type things.
That's where I'm coming from.
And I said, no jump starts that can be done online?
I think that I would need somebody that's more well-versed in this than I am, but I think that welding was a good example, that it requires tools and materials, and a lot of the really in-demand type roles require that type of equipment, access to a program, which would require superintendent said, I could put kids on a bus and send them 3 hours to the X, Y, and Z, but I don't know if that's feasible, the right thing, et cetera. So that's the tension.
Well, my
That's
question
the feedback I'm getting.
is there some jump starts that can't be done online? The question is there some jump starts that can be done online? Does every rural parish have the option of doing a jump start that is online?
Yeah, what rigorous, good, high quality, like high wage, high growth careers can a rural parish
Well, I
access?
think for that point, it's really high point.
Well, hopefully our high point equals the other thing.
Right. Correct,
Yes.
but
Yep.
focusing more on high point at this juncture.
Yep,
Is that an option? Do they have any of those online?
yep, online, or there's some creative
Or
mechanism.
4 days a week online, 1 day a week, you can get on a bus and go.
Yep.
And 3 hours, I don't think anybody, does anybody have to drive is anybody 3 hours away from the closest
That was the
jump
example.
start, or is it more like an hour?
That was the example that was given to me. I mean, depending on where you are in the state, depending on what the program is, all that kind of stuff. And part of this is, a lot of points, right? And incentives will make people innovate and figure out things. More things could go online. A summer program could pop up where school systems get together in a region of the state and say, we're gonna have a summer program that focuses on this. We're gonna do all the coursework during the school year. We're gonna do the hands-on during the summer, and these are the things we gotta do. This incentivizes that. It's hard.
Well, and if they can't make it happen, and they get a B or a C because of it, then that's important for their legislators to know. My school system's getting a C or a D or a B because they don't have this option. I need to do something to get them this option. But if we just say, well, we're gonna have to give them an A because they don't have the availability, then the legislature never gets the message.
Cool, but I wrote down the big takeaway was, particularly for rural school systems, like what access do they have to advanced credentials that are online, minimal in-person, minimal equipment, or can be done in a way they can do it in chunks, that they could do that work and get it done for kiddos.
Or what do we need to ask the legislature to change to allow something like that to happen?
Yep.
So we can tell those cities, we're working on a plan for you.
Yep. The next concern that we've heard is linked to this cost of implementing. I'm gonna keep this up here, I'm gonna go, I'm on slide 12 talking, but we're gonna keep this up here for folks. Concern about the cost of implementing AP, IB, CLEP, dual enrollment, jumpstart credentials. Spent some time with our college and career strategy, or college and career readiness team. Some funds do exist to cover the cost of credentialing, and supporting systems would have to be part of the rollout plan, some kind of consolidation of all the resources that already exist around this to support school systems to say, these are where you can access the funds and this is what you can spend the funds on. I don't know that all of this will be covered by existing funds, but also sometimes things do cost money, that local resources need to be identified, particularly if we want to make a really rigorous standard while we work to identify places where the legislature could make these things available.
Just do we have a sense of how big the hurdle is right now?
I have not been given a specific dollar amount. I do know from my time in New Orleans, we spent a lot of time identifying courses that kids were taking, making sure that if it was a CTE course, that it was coded as a CTE course to generate the funds for those things, and the CEF. And I know that we were sending money back to the state. It was reimbursable. In the CEF category particularly, we were not expending all of it. And I think that's the case.
A lot of parishes not spending all the money available.
So
I just want to make sure that if cost is a hurdle, that we understand there is a hurdle. How big of a hurdle is it, right? So that we come back and we'll say we go with this, and we understand going in, it is achievable, right? We don't put something in place that's not achievable because the funds aren't there.
there are a lot of funding streams focused on credentialing, college readiness, going to college, there's TOPS Tech Early Start. There is a lot of for this.
So whenever we, if we get to the point where we're ready to, recommend to the board, this is what we want to do,
I just like to be comfortable that we can answer that question.
And-
So, yeah, this is a recommendation, it is doable, we're comfortable, you know, the funds are there, and 80% or 90% or whatever for the schools in the state. And comfortable with recommending something that, you know, that is achievable. That's all I'm asking for.
Isn't the current MFP that's on the table expanding the definition of what can be used with the CDF funds or the CDF-like funds, if that's not the exact funds, and increasing the amount of money that the state is sending now to locals to pay for dual enrollment? So we're already working in the direction of trying to address this issue.
Yeah,
And all indications are that the MFP that's on the table is going to pass at this point, so
both of
that help
those
should be
things,
coming.
both of those things are true. I believe what Ken said was that its tuition is now permissible in that funding stream that previously wasn't. So it is moving toward closing this resource gap that we can work to put a number to and understand that more. The next, any other concerns around resources and that? Third thing that I've heard is there's no assessment to assess the quality of dual enrollment. And I've heard that from a variety of different stakeholders, from a variety of different perspectives. The response, the only thing that I could respond to that with is we could consider requiring some alignment requirements around the pathways and pairing CLEP exams so that they wouldn't have to take, if they took 3 dual enrollments, they might not have to take 3 CLEP exams, but they would have to take a CLEP exam that's aligned to math or English or whatever. Other states, like Florida, and I believe Mississippi also, they have a dual enrollment requirement that is you take, pass the class, and get a C-. Theirs is actually like lower than the number of credits that we're proposing. I don't think they have seen that much inflation related to that, but it is something that has been brought up to me as a concern. The last thing is enforcing the dual enrollment minimum ACT score for credit seems like a place where we would be mixing indicators in a way that kind of is not what we hope to accomplish. And if it's a jumpstart career pathway dual enrollment, we might not want to make ACT the limiting factor for that. So it's a concern. In transparency, wanted to bring it so that folks had it. Thoughts, reflections.
So, I mean, I think the ACT can be useful, but I also think that it can create barriers, particularly for low-income kids and children of color, to gaining access to dual enrollment. And so I want to be sensitive to that because we want to be expanding access to dual enrollment, both at the top university, as well as career and tech. But I do have real concerns about how because the career and technical path to me has credentials that are not controlled by the schools that are providing the dual enrollment classes that provide kind of a measure of rigor for us and whether or not kids are passing those credentials. But on the university side, that is not there. And so, I've asked questions about our early learning academies that are going on across the state. Like, I don't think that anybody is tracking persistence, like, so what happens to those kids when they leave their high schools with those dual enrollment credits? Are they doing well in their colleges or their community colleges when they get there? Like, to me, this is a very big black box that nobody seems to own. Like, the department, it's not their job to assess the quality in those classes because they're the Department of Education. But when you ask the Board of Regents, they argue that they're not responsible for it either. And so from my perspective, if we're going to be including this in our accountability system, then it's incumbent on somebody to make sure that these are high quality classes. And I'll just say too, and this is from an incentive perspective, college enrollment is about to fall off a demographic cliff, right? Is going to be an all-out war for students and seats to be able to keep community colleges and four-year universities afloat. And it creates a situation that is ripe for grade inflation and a whole host of other things to be able to help colleges stay open. I mean, that's just the reality. It's gonna be bitter and ugly, and not all of them are gonna survive. So we just need to be aware of those things that change, that impact our accountabilities.
Jim?
Yeah, I guess partly repeating what's been said already. I'm not sure that that's our issue today. I think it's an important issue, because I've heard it a lot too. And a suggestion that I throw out there is there some sort of end of course test that the community colleges, wherever these students are going next, that institution could implement in order to verify.
We could,
But again, I don't know that that's our duty
the thing that
to make sure that it happens.
Yeah, I agree to some degree, whether it's our duty or not. I worry about us putting an incentive that we don't have controls around. That then we know is gonna result in this other behavior that we might not think is good. For example, if a student is not ready for dual enrollment, and they're in dual enrollment in 10th grade, and they're not getting basic literacy skills, and instead they're reading whatever is in that English 1001 course, they're not gonna get to mastery on the end of course test that they need to take for that class, because they're focused on this other thing to get points for the school. So it's this like delicate balance of what's the right thing. We have a meeting, Millie and I, with a person on the Accountability Commission, Susanna Craig, who works for the Board of Regents, and we'll spend some time with her on this particular question around this end of course exam that they maybe could develop or something along those lines. But the other idea that has come out is like there are exams that are sort of like that. The CLEP exams, there are CLEP exams for English, there are CLEP exams for particular maths that could be a proxy for the level of college readiness that we would expect for a student who got English 1001. And maybe not require the number to match the number of dual enrollment credits, but at least say you took 3 dual enrollment math credits, or 3 dual enrollment math classes, and you were able to pass a math CLEP exam to tell us that you are ready for college math. You passed the college math exam, because all of these other examples have an exam tied to it, an independent third-party thing.
And vote on this to the dual enrollment task force. Because they wanted to relax the requirements to take these courses for everyone. So I think that should be part of that conversation with that group as well.
Well, if there was an end of course test, then it wouldn't really matter much if we relaxed the requirements to get in. As long as the child had a 12 on the ACT and got in and passed that end of course test.
Right.
That's the important part.
Right. I'm just saying it would be good to get them to weigh in on it.
But on somewhat of a flip side, this problem didn't exist until we put it into the accountability system and had created a bunch of students having the opportunity to take dual enrollment courses. I think it's a good problem to have, and it will, maybe create a fix to it. But it's better than not having the problem of no kids taking dual enrollment courses.
Right, so how do we put those guardrails in place to say, so that young people, that dual enrollment is the right thing for them, they've met with the family, they've talked with the family, the student feels like this is what they want to do, that they are in it to win it, and they're going to do it, and they're ready for it.
When is the dual enrollment task force meeting?
How do we find out?
Let's do a process.
June.
Shan, when?
June
Do you know the date?
the 13th.
Okay, look at that. Shan, when is this meeting that we're in right now technically held until? Is it still?
We didn't have an end time.
I just want to double check, because I think we're having a really rich discussion and probably on track to be here till about 8. So I just want to check that is what everybody at this table is going for. Otherwise, I think we're going to have to prioritize, again, we're not at the point of decision making. We just need to, so this is not about, this is where I stand on this issue. We have to figure out what questions do we have that are going to keep the process moving forward. So that, and I believe probably some of the public too, yes.
The last thing that I would just say that I've heard, and I think that we've got some potential solves, is the current formula as it exists today and the proposal doesn't address work-based experiences and preparation for military service. Were things that I've heard from folks that run schools, folks that work in the world of preparing kids for career. One thing that we've talked about leveraging here at the department is we have a work-based learning like internship, like course code with specific requirements that comes with career development funds that helps a student go to a work-based experience, have feedback from an employer, et cetera, which I think that we think is valuable. Work experience is good. And it's something that some of our best schools in the career tech ed field are doing this, and it's not being recognized in the formula at all. So it is something that we want to explore. On the military service front, there are some states, such as Kentucky, that include the ASVAB exam as a measure of readiness because you get the result from the ASVAB, and it can help do a career inventory and at least give you one, it measures whether you're ready for this thing, and it's objective, and two, it tells you what type of career you could have if you chose to enlist, which I have complicated feelings on. Things to know is the family can determine whether the military gets the results or whether the kid just gets the results, which was an important thing as I dug into it. But wanted to throw those two things out there and get any immediate reactions to. We feel like those are valid concerns around work-based experiences being recognized, and the military.
And let me refine just for this. If you agree with that, then there's no reason to co-sign on it. If you have a strong addition, then I think we would speak up, just so that we're kind of continuing to move if that analysis is close enough. Good, keep going.
Cool. Then we're going to go to slide 17. Just so folks can have an appreciation for how much more rigorous this is than the current strength diploma index. Currently, a high school diploma with an associate's degree is 160. We're putting this on that 125 scale, so there's that immediate sticker shock, so read there. Then the high school diploma with an AP score of 3 or higher, an IB score of 4 or higher, or a CLEP score of 50 or higher is currently 150. This proposal brings that down to a 75. An advanced statewide jumpstart credential, we are saying is 100.
So how do you get 100 on the top pathway?
I'll show it on the next slide.
Okay.
It's hard to show things that are all moving at the same time. So this is the current accountability formula, and the number of points on the next slide, I'll show the number of points for the new formula by itself. High school diploma plus taking a top score aligned credit that's AP, dual enrollment, IB, or a basic jumpstart credential is currently 110 points. This would give you 50 points for that, and a 4-year graduate is 100 points, and the proposal is 0 points. So this is a significant increase in the rigor, or whatever word you use to describe the point removal from this index, reflective of the expectation of what we think in an index that is supposed to measure the opportunities post-high school that kiddos have, we think that it should have. So the next slide shows the number of points in a much more clear way for the current proposal. This is just to show you what it is. So we talked through this last meeting, but fast forward aligned associate's degree, 3 AP IB exams, an advanced level that you pass, you're a 3 or better or a 4 or better depending on the exam. Advanced level 3 or 4 credential or a fast forward aligned apprenticeship is 125 points. 100 points on the TOPS pathway for passing 2 AP, IB, etc. 12 dual enrollment credits with a C or better that are top score aligned or an advanced credential. Then 75 points for passing one of those exams and 9 dual enrollment credits, or 50 points for taking and passing the course, not the AP exam, or taking and passing 2 dual enrollment classes with a C or better, or a basic credential for 50, and there's no points for graduating. Because this is a measure of what opportunities does the student have afterward based off of the additional credentials that they receive?
Just to be clear, there, in some other part of the formula, there is some points that schools are getting for a basic diploma, right?
They are getting points in the graduation rate index.
So zero here, but they're getting points someplace else.
Yep.
And if you were to move to this, it would not necessarily decrease the number of A's and B's depending on where you make the cut score for the A's and the B's. We can still get a bell-shaped curve depending on what we decide to do with that aspect.
Yep.
And that's the jump between, so the 50 and 100, I see there's the basic jumpstart credential, and then in the 100, you have the advanced credential. Is the assumption that, because there's nothing in that 75 that I see outright that deals with jumpstart, is that because the assumption is that some of those 9 dual enrollment credits are jumpstart credits?
It could be that. There's also another slide that comes right after that is additional work to be done, because there's something that doesn't exist yet that we think that needs to be created, or folks think might need to be created. We need to figure out what basic credentials we don't actually think are worthy of rewarding in the accountability system. They exist, we've removed some in the past, we should do it again. The next thing is we should explore the creation of a basic credential. So if you do one of those, you get basic. If you get 2 of those, you've done this like intermediate level credential that's worth 75. We just don't have that yet, and that's something that the IBC Council would need to weigh in on, but the dream would be to put some really good pair of credentials, set of experiences in the 75 category as well.
I have one more question. Is there a way to reward high schools that are achieving the top 125 points for a kid that's on the university diploma path, but is also simultaneously pursuing a jump start path as well?
So like if they,
Like a bonus?
give me an example, just for like a straw person proposal.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking about, I have a junior in high school right now who's already 125 points for his school. But I also know he already has 1 basic jumpstart credential and has the possibility of getting an advanced credential his senior year. And so that school has done kind of like a double duty in a sense, like he's excelling on his university path, but he's also managed to do some jumpstart work as well. So is there, I mean, I just thought of it, so like, it's not well thought out, but I don't know if that would, is that something that would be worth thinking about?
The current formula does some things like that, where it's like this is 110, but if you do this plus this, it's 115. Like that does exist in the current formula. It adds some complexity,
Yeah.
which is something that we would have to decide is worth it, but it's certainly worthy of discussion.
And in the discussion of complexity, I guess you'd also want to look at just how many students would it potentially affect. If it's 1 student a year, then it might not be worth the complexity. If it's 1,000 students a year, then maybe it would be.
Yep. The last thing that I'll flag that we talked a good bit about at the last meeting is students who arrive below basic, which is far below proficiency, providing a floor number of points for that student in terms of graduation for the strength diploma, acknowledging that they are far less likely to graduate. 25 points if the student was below basic in ELA and math coming out of 8th grade, and then 25 points for students who were also not proficient in English, and 10 points for students who are below basic in ELA or math. And we shared data last time to support that. But don't want to skip it. We talked about the additional work to be done. Okay, high school. That is the high school piece. Thoughts, reflections, strong feelings, love, hate.
I'm really looking forward to the stakeholder comments on the high school.
Me too. Me too. I had some of it in the cafeteria a little while ago.
Have you been doxxed? Does it know where you live?
Oh,
Your
yeah.
home address?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
We need you like the Supreme Court is going to get extra security.
Okay, so K2 accountability. In June of 2021, the department presented a sketch of what K2 accountability would look like. And really was just seeking the endorsement of the board to continue to move forward with that work. And there was a lot of conversation about, does the board need to do this thing in order for the administration to move forward with the work of K2 accountability? As we know, in order to do this well, you need data in order to know what's going to happen as a result of this. And you can't do that until you've got multiple years of the test. When the initial accountability system was formed, the test had existed for several years prior to the creation of the original accountability system. What we don't want to do is say, this is the percentage that the literacy score is going to be, the literacy assessment is going to be, this is the percentage the growth measure is going to be, this is the percentage that the class observations are going to be, until we know whether the class observations match with the research base that we're using, and we're actually seeing that the two things are working together. We don't want to say, this should be 25%, and this should be 35%, and this should be 45%. So in order to model these, we know that we need the K2 learning year phase 1 to be completed. This upcoming school year, we have school systems that have opted in, that were already planning to do the class or NIET, to have third-party observations where we send folks in to review, gather really good comprehensive data, more than the data that we collected this year. Second, we need to administer the assessment, which we'll have in 2023, 2024, and then we will be able to do something with growth in 24, 25, which tells us that we have time to do this. But we need to get aligned around, like, where are we going? Not necessarily what's it gonna be, but what do we think matters around, like, the values of K2 accountability, not adopt policy tomorrow. Because what we don't wanna have happen is adopt a policy and then increase elementary school scores based off of nothing but the results of that literacy assessment when nothing has changed. We don't want to have that outcome. We want to be able to model and know what's going to happen as a result of it. So,
Does that resonate with everybody?
does it match with people's recollections of what happened in June? Because I was not here.
What's the compliance requirement with the law that was passed?
When we have the literacy assessment, we need to include it in the district and school accountability system. It's not prescriptive about where, it just says in that system. And you could do that.
Well, there was a deadline like 2023.
There's a deadline to administer the assessment, not a deadline to implement it in accountability.
So what does that mean, administer the assessment?
To give the test, to give students the test.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that, it may have been intentional not to put the date by which it had to be in the formula, because sometimes you look at the results and you say, we need 2 years of data to know, impact data to know that we think these results are valid and reliable. So I included in here, just for folks' reference, some slides that were presented in June of 2021, that the Louisiana accountability system should inform and focus educators to clear expectations of student outcomes, and to provide objective information about school and site quality to parents and other community stakeholders. In developing the K2 performance, Louisiana wants to define a cohesive set of expectations for teachers and school systems for grade 2, utilize a limited, coherent, and efficient set of tools to monitor outcomes across schools, systems, and schools, provide maximum consistency across grade levels to support ease of use by educators, and reflect the academic goals of K2 in the way that schools are measured. Do these seem like the right priorities as we are gathering data to inform future policy that would come in several years?
Is there anything you'd add?
Efficient and effective, right? Those are the two things when we're thinking about it from a policy perspective.
Right, effective, you mean?
that it's gonna register what kids know and give us diagnostic tools to move them forward. Like, from what I feel like Dibbles doesn't do that for you, right? So whatever kind of literacy assessment that we're using ought to be helping teachers identify the weaknesses that a child has so that they can be addressed, not just spitting out some number that we're gonna be able to stick in the accountability system.
The things that sit in tension with each other is the efficiency of how much your kid's being tested, how it, what's being assessed, et cetera, and also wanting to have good, reliable information.
Most feedback I got on this one was the lack of any reference to numeracy. So we've got the obvious focus on literacy. There was a lot of discussion on whether or not there would be two different assessment tools, right, for presentation, for observation. You really need two. You know, are you going to be comparing apples against oranges? Why don't you just use one? What's the added value for having two? Are you opening up a can of worms here, creating more controversy because they got two?
Yep.
And then the other feedback I got was, again, you know, there was no reference to numeracy. Then I get to fourth grade, okay, why are our numeracy scores so bad, right? Well, we didn't focus on the K through 3.
I think that I hear clearly we need to add numeracy. And also, I think that your point around the one or two observation tools is covered in bullet 2, utilize a limited, coherent, and efficient set of tools. So the question is, how limited, how efficient, and we need data to be able to say, yeah, like these two tools are doing the same thing.
Right.
Or they're not.
It's one or the other, or need both because.
Yep. Also, there's a cost, right? If a school system is doing one thing, making them change to another thing, one will have impact on student performance, two will have impact on teacher performance and burnout and all of those things. So like forcing a change also has consequences.
Right.
So we need to like weigh and understand, which is part of why I think looking at both of the observation tools was, yeah.
And it's still the case that there is no other state in the country that's assessing K2 in their accountability system.
To my knowledge, and this study group could, in the report, say, I don't believe Mississippi does.
No, it's not in their accountability.
But they do have checkpoints, quality control points in the progression from K through 4. So if you're not at a certain literacy efficiency by grade 2, then there's an intervention step. Same thing for grade 3, you know, I don't think social promotion is addressed.
But that's different than it being practiced.
Yeah, just saying there are some quality control points.
Okay. So, just so that folks can have this in their head before the next meeting, a recommendation could be to accept these as the things we're trying to accomplish, this line of things to study, and also say that we should explore working with the legislature to potentially remove the requirement or adjust the requirement of how we have to include this in the formula if folks are concerned about including it in the formula.
So how would, okay, so for work group members, like what would you need to see to give you a stronger perspective on that? Would you want to see how Mississippi progress monitors, like what would give us a sense of that level of clarity? Unless you might already have it, you might feel like you can make that decision.
I mean, for me, I want to see what because we've got the birth to grade 2, and class is crazy expensive and crazy time consuming. And I would like to know if the kids that have teachers that are highly effective in class are actually, do we see growth? And are they achieving better education outcomes, like in the move from pre-K to our kindergartens, and then also from, you know, if we have these school systems that are doing a little bit of this already, you know, what do our progress evaluations say?
Can you justify the investment?
Yeah, because it's a lot of money and a lot of time.
But Thomas, birth through 2, that doesn't mean here that birth is going to be included in the accountability system.
No,
It's
it's
part
in
of the tool to
It's-
see how they're performing.
Well, classes, the preschools get graded on their own accountability system, and classes use
So what assessments do they give besides Dibbles, anything?
I believe there are 4. I'm looking at an area who's probably feverishly looking. Oh, it's in here, probably.
Is it the, I feel like I saw it.
Steve,
The NIET.
Dibbles, Arcadians, there are 4. They are different, they measure similar things, but not exactly the same thing. So we have to go to a universal screener, that is a requirement. So clearly here, we need to know whether this is gonna work, or whether the things are aligned, which is where we started this conversation around collecting good impact data on student literacy from the test, and also having good reliable data from classroom observations, so that we can determine, are the 2 things the same thing? And does this thing correlate with this thing? The better this is, the better this is. And if it is super correlated, I don't know if we need that. So
So bottom line, what I'm hearing, I think, is that short term, we're not recommending a formal accountability system until we get to digest the test results, the literacy screening results, right? Okay, so by defining short term, right now that I'm looking at, growth scores will be available 24, 25. Achievement scores available 23, 24. Okay, so achievements at your best baseline for your growth, I'm assuming that's the deal, okay? So once we've got both of those, then 25, 26, we've got sufficient data where we'll make some sort of recommendation for those. Okay, so I got that right. Okay, so then in the interim between now and 25, 26, what are we going to be doing to, as far as quality control measures, as far as understanding, hey, what's working, what's not working, so that we've got some sort of interim process in place, we put a formal accountability system. We have some metrics that you know, are going to be stewarded, or what are we going to do?
well, when we have the first test, we'll have the results.
Yeah.
We will continue to collect, until that point, the district administered assessments, which are the 4 that Amelia just texted me, actually. Do you want to just tell us what they are?
Yeah, it's Acadian's reading, Dibbles deep, steep, and step.
All of those or one of those?
All 4 of those are
Okay.
currently are applicants.
All 4 of those are options, or all 4 of those will be implemented?
All 4 of those are options currently.
Okay.
We will select a universal screener that will then be required to be included in the district and school accountability system.
That's why the literacy report for kindergarten is so complicated when we get it. It's because they're all,
Multiple tests.
different
Multiple
scales.
tests, self-reported.
and One of them's a lot harder.
Which
to
they
fix
really
than
asked,
the other
the
three.
district really asked for that. So if we had it at one test at one time.
The assessment will be a secure test administration. It will be all of those things, so it will be significantly more reliable than the results that we're currently getting, which will allow us to have some confidence when we start running data around class observation, NIET observation, and outcome to make some decisions around what needs to be in here. Do we need a growth measure? Can the class observation be the growth measure? There's just so many different potential things at this point without having good high quality data. I don't want to put us in a box.
So at this point in time, as far as the observations go, the NIET or the class, what I'm hearing is the recommendation is not to specify one or the other. You would let the district make that decision, that they expect to use one or the other, is that right? Okay.
But to be determined whether we think that we can use both of them once we have the data, or whether we should compel either of them.
And to be fair, right, that's not requiring the accountability system under the law. It's just the literacy part.
Right.
Right, so that class business is just stuff that got added in the process. Which I think the research shows that it'll work very well, but that's.
We had this whole conversation already. Thank you for guiding us there on slide 29. Reliable monitoring of K2 could not be done before 24-25. There are a couple different ways to think about including an accountability assessment indicator, including the assessment index, the growth index, or another appropriate index. It doesn't have to be its own thing under the current law. And as in June 2021, the department's request is that BESE endorse the concept of K2 accountability and study the use of the instructional quality measure alongside the literacy assessment to come later with a data-based, evidence-based proposal once we have reliable data.
Can you remind us how those elementary schools get their score
Yep.
that are just K2?
Yep, schools that don't have third grade pair with the school in their system that most of their students matriculate to. And they get the data from those that school for their score. And it is the most fun part of releasing school performance scores. Having only done it one time, it is the most stressful part of it. Figuring out like which, get them all, and we always do get them all, but it's a long road to get there.
So they do have grade now?
Yep, oh yeah,
Okay.
yep, but it's not their grade, it is the grade that the majority of the school that the majority of the kids went to from their school. So there's and there will be tons of things once we have the data, and we'll have to spend time with USDOE because they're going to still want us to use that third grade LEAP data for a significant component of how we're grading that K-2 school. Because there's requirements because of the way that the feeder pattern's set up. But that is down the road. And I look forward to seeing it.
So Ronnie, we're coming to the end of our K2 discussion, which is also the end of our time. Did you raise in the beginning, like rightfully so, wanting to call us back to the initial proposals and whether or not, we're kind of getting clear on where we are today? Do you feel as though we're closer in your mind after hearing the K2 accountability piece? Or have your questions and concerns been adequately addressed?
Yeah, I think on K2, there's clarification on what the recommendation is going to be for path forward. On the strength of diploma, are you referring to all three items, or are you just referring to K2 accountability?
K2 to start.
Yeah.
Just wanted to.
Yeah.
Any other
I
remaining?
think we're
Good. For the group, any other questions on K2 still clear on next steps? Okay, then my recommendation is go to 31 and do the walkthrough.
So I took the liberty of starting to put together based off of the presentation where I thought we would land, to start to outline out what Kira and I will put together for the group. K2 recommendation, continue collecting information to inform a future K2 proposal based off of that slide that we just went through. Scaling, we want to shift to a 100-point scale with 25 incentive points. High school ACT and strength of diploma, we have talked at length about ACT work keys and TOPS University, removing the work keys option for TOPS University students. And then for strength diploma, recognizing the value of experiences beyond high school diploma in the index, engage further with stakeholders on adjustments to the credential types and the value of work-based experiences, potentially military service, etc. Growth and the last two bullets are tied together. They've got to both happen in order for either of them to happen. Augment our assessment and significantly address negative scale score change, as we talked about. And if we can do that, in order to work on the high school and elementary school score misalignment, we're going to more rigorously measure the post-secondary credentials, so that strength of diploma and that ACT index. Look at the weight of LEAP for the high schools, which is already baked into that simulation. Improve the ACT index, and then in elementary schools, if we get the growth measure right, value growth higher in elementary schools.
What? Were you gonna say something?
Yeah, I would just like to say that the one piece that I think that we have not addressed in all of this is the fact that we are giving kids a 0 for a 17 on the ACT, when a 17 allows them to access TOPS Tech, which
trying to say that we value career and college readiness, the career part as well. I think that that is out of sync with what we say we are prioritizing, especially in light of the fact that we are removing points from the ACT work keys for top U students. Because I think that by doing that and then keeping the 0 for a 17 on the ACT, you are going to incentivize schools to move kids who are capable of going to a 4-year college. They're going to move to the career and technical diploma side, career and technical diploma side, and then the door to a 4-year university is going to be closed to them because they will not graduate with the units that they need to be able to access a 4-year university. And so that worries me. I've said it before, but I feel like I have to have it on the record that I'm still really concerned about that.
Still true for you. Is there a part in the next meeting that we want to have a more formal discussion about that? Do you want to leave it? Is there more to say amongst this work group about what the was just raised, Jim?
Yeah, one of the reasons that we perceive a shift of districts focusing more on work keys, having their students focus more on work keys than they did a few years back, is because students potentially can get more points by taking the work keys than they can by taking the ACT. It seems like there may be two ways to address that. One, don't allow the students on the 4-year pathway to take the ACT. Take the work keys, which is a problem, causes problems that you just pointed out. Another way to address it might be to adjust the number of points that you get by taking work keys so that a student that doesn't get extra points by taking the work key. Adjust the points that you get for work keys so that a student that gets so many points for ACT wouldn't be expected to get more points if they take the work keys. Whatever points, it seems like we're giving too many points for work keys. If you reduce that so that the student that gets this many points on the ACT would be expected to get the exact same points on the work keys, there would be no incentive to shift a 4-year student from taking the ACT a second time and have them take the work keys instead. Am I being clear on that? Does it make sense?
I'm not as fresh as I once was.
Point of process is simply, do we want to put on the table to discuss this with the appropriate data preparation so we can all engage in the next meeting?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
Great, let's put it on the next one. Anything else you want to adjust about this as we start to take a stab at the actual report? No? Doesn't know?
I don't know what you're going to on 32, I haven't looked at 32 yet.
32 we
32
did,
is
I
the
did it
same
in the
slide
beginning.
from, it's just
Literally
copy and
just
paste it.
my proposed path to.
It's, I think, slide 3.
Okay. So,
Is there anything you would amend?
well, I just got a question about approach and timing.
Okay.
Okay, so there was a lot of, there was some discussion at the last time this group met. And there was clearly discussion, with BESE about the piecemeal approach. And there was a lot of concern about it. So I'm interested in where this group is going to land with regard to a piecemeal approach versus, let's wait 2 years until we can do the growth like the way we want to do it, right? Because if you take the piecemeal approach, then you're not going to get the outcomes desired, right? So I don't know where we are on that,
Yeah.
but I'd like to have some discussion on that because I think it's going to be something the board's going to ask.
Yeah.
And then the other question I have is, again, with regard to timing for implementation, which would have be part of that discussion on the piecemeal approach, right? I kind of feel like the train has already left on some of these initiatives, right? Dual enrollment, fast forward, but yet the accountability system doesn't reflect that. So you're going to have some folks that are going to take advantage of those initiatives and they're going to achieve those goals, but they're not going to get credit for them because they don't exist in the accountability system. So I think that's something that we can talk about as well.
Okay.
And one of the steps in the stakeholder feedback during the summer is working with people that are going to have to implement this to understand what timeline would it take and what would be reasonable but rigorous expectations to shift and be able to start offering these things, while also acknowledging folks that have already started doing the work that the.
Right, because I mean, you want people to make the right decision, right? And, you know, if I make the right decision, okay, well, maybe I don't get as many points if I make the other decision, because the accountability system isn't reflected yet, right? So make sure we put people in a position to succeed, right? So.
Okay, so we're wrapping up. I think it would be, given just, this has been a remarkably, I think, in-depth discussion, and I think it'd be really interesting if we could each just go around and take 30 seconds, each work group member. Shan, would love for you to share as well if you'd like to. And either share one like insight that you actually had coming out of today, since the point of this is to be a study group, or an action, your action, there's concrete things you want to take, or an appreciation. Could be an appreciation for yourself, could be for me. An appreciation, an insight, or an action, if there are specific actions. Jim's going to start.
Yeah, I'll start off. I like the way this group is getting to more concrete proposals. Early on, it seemed like we weren't getting anywhere, because we were talking about, well, what is the system, let's go over the history, and we were getting somewhere, but it didn't feel like it. But now it certainly is more evident that we're getting someplace, and we're closing in on the end. And I like that.
I like how there's been a rollout, and basically what Joe's saying. And I don't know if I really see it piecemeal. I really see that there are things coming together. And I love how we had that really deep discussion about growth and award and incentivizing the kids. But not much so that the kids, but the school, the teachers that are working so hard to get the kids to where they are. And like the recommendation. So I was like, you can really see.
Like that.
But I think that our conversations surrounding growth have been really rewarding, because I feel like our accountability system, as it is currently situated, doesn't do a good job of rewarding our schools that are educating kids that have the biggest barriers to educational attainment. And so I like that we're trying to focus on making sure that the schools that are doing the hardest work are being recognized for that work.
Yeah, I just think Mr. Lambert's done a great job leading us through this, so we really appreciate that he's got a thick skin. And I know he's making big bucks, so I'm not worried about that part of it. But I really appreciate, his leadership. I feel better about the timeline with regard to an update at June BESE as opposed to recommendations at June BESE. So I feel a lot better about that. Getting the feedback from the board then, and then come back in August, with some formal recommendations. I am a little concerned still, though, about the stakeholder feedback. I've got formal stakeholder feedback during June and July, but I haven't heard any details about what that looks like.
We'll revisit that in the next meeting. In depth.
That would be part of the report.
Yeah.
These are the things that will be done.
Okay, so we shouldn't expect stakeholder input to start until when?
Well, the next meeting is remember, our next meeting is May
2 weeks,
25th, so stakeholder engagement starts in June.
Okay.
Right.
And again, the formal.
So formal.
Like,
Right, I get
there are people in this room that have emailed me specifically about this, and I have responded to.
Yeah.
More than one.
So the question is,
Hold
the
on.
next meeting,
Let's finish my check-in, and then, of course,
Okay.
there'll be, go ahead, Sharon.
okay, I really appreciate the open-mindedness of the board members. I feel like they didn't come in with preconceived ideas. They have wants, but they also are listening to what the other board members are saying.
I appreciate all of you and going on this journey with us. And Kira for answering my phone calls and solving these things together, and all of her support. We're gonna land the plane. My action items are significantly improve our growth measure, develop a report with Kira, and keep listening.
Great, that's great. I just want to appreciate this work group. I think in my now 11 years on this board, it's very seldom that I think that we get to like engage this deeply in anything, any one topic. And certainly this topic is worthy of that of us, but we've risen to that. And I think there's still a lot of work ahead, obviously, the next 2 months in engaging the public and really just better understanding how this proposal plan will be critical. But I think that we've in earnest met that initial challenge. I want to thank Thomas, because not just for all the work that it takes to lead to this moment to have discussions at the table, but then the way you're able to engage at the table and meet the variety of interests that exist across this work group with grace and with challenge and courage. So thank you for your leadership. Ronnie, can you live with that, coming back to that being in a report for stakeholders, or is there a specific recommendation you'd like to make for the next meeting as it relates to the stakeholder question?
With regard to?
Stakeholder.
Yeah, but with regard to the stakeholder process or the timing, or where are you going?
All of that we're going to get into in the next meeting, or is there something you want to put on the record now to ensure we address?
Okay, so as far as expectations for the next meeting, okay. Well, I think the main thing is just that we've got a formal process for stakeholder input that we've shared with the public. The public's had every opportunity to engage. And I think that I'd like to see opportunities there that are some face-to-face opportunities, right? As opposed to just, okay, we open the portal for 2 weeks or whatever, people sending their comments to the portal. I'd like to see some opportunity, right, for face-to-face engagement.
In your district, in each board member's district, what do you see?
I just like to see it as a topic of conversation, you know, and we'll see where it goes. And, you know, it basically maybe with those comments, you know, some of the folks that are listening could provide some input for what they like, right? But the end result, right, is we want all stakeholders to feel like they had an opportunity to engage, and that process was shared with them in a timely manner so they could plan appropriately.
Multiple ways of engaging, that's what I'm saying. Great. All right.
So my question was, is the next meeting the last meeting?
No, we don't know yet.
Never say never.
Before June, before the June BESE meeting?
At this point, we believe so, unless this group decides.
My recommendation would be to properly notice items, like you were considering
Understood.
the report, and take public comment.
Okay, great. Since if it is in fact the last meeting.
Correct.
Understood. Great, thank you all, we're adjourned.